Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is John Campea, and this is our special open spoiler discussion of the new Marvel movie, Black Widow. Yes, that Black Widow that was supposed to be in theaters well over a year ago, but it's now out, and we are doing a spoiler discussion for it. Now, just to let you guys know, in case the title didn't give it away, this is an open spoiler discussion. We're going to talk about all the details in the film. We're going to give away everything there is to give away in it. So if you have not seen Black Widow yet, just, set this video as one of your favorites. Come back and visit it a little bit later. But we are going to be talking about Black Widow. Now, as we do in all of our special videos, if you want to get in a live thought, comment, question, whatever, don't use the tip link that's in the description of this video. That's for the John Campea Show. If you're watching this live and you want to get in a thought, question, opinion, or whatever on this, just use the super chat feature on YouTube, and that's how we differentiate questions sent in for these special videos versus the ones for the John Campea Show. Also, guys, as always, I'm going to take the first few minutes to give you my thoughts and opinions on the film, and then we're going to spend the vast majority of our time just taking your thoughts and comments on Black Widow. Clear. And hello to everybody we just launched, and we've got like over 400 people in the live chat already. Good to have you guys here. Glad you're joining us on this Sunday. I was watching Italy playing, but they were losing the last I checked. So whatever. We're here doing the spoiler discussion today. All right. So here's my personal thoughts on Black Widow. And you guys probably heard me give my general review of this earlier, but just to recap, I like this movie. I thought it was pretty entertaining. I do not think Black Widow is what you would call top shelf MCU. Like, it's not in the same category as Winter Soldier, Avengers, Civil War, things. I don't consider it like top shelf MCU, but I found it to be pretty damn good. I kind of put it in the same category as Ant-Man. I really like Ant-Man. Like, same category as Doctor Strange, things like that. So not top shelf MCU, but I enjoyed it. Let me talk first about the things that I really liked about it. I got to start with David Harbour as Red Guardian. To me, he stole the movie. And I feel like the writers and the director of the film saved all the best lines and best moments for him. I feel like they gave him all the best moments, personally. And I don't mean that as a criticism on anything else. I just could have watched, and I said this before, I could watch an entire Red Guardian movie. You make just a full Red Guardian movie, I am there, especially after watching how their iteration of him in this movie. I loved it. The family dynamics. Like, I thought I would find that cheesy in this movie, right? My expectations were, I thought it was going to be, the family stuff was all going to be cheesy and all that kind of stuff. But this is why you leave your expectations at the door. Because I watched the movie and it's like the family dynamics was actually one of my favorite things about the movie. I really enjoyed whenever the family was either together or working together or what have you. The performances of both Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh. I mean, Florence Pugh is stepping into a hard situation. She's stepping into a movie, acting opposite one of the world's best actresses in a role that she is beloved in as Black Widow. And I thought she did more than hold her own. I thought she was great. And I thought the chemistry between Scarlett Johansson and Pugh were also really, really good. I thought that stuff was good as well. The action sequences were good. I mean, they're not warrior good, but they were solid action sequences. I didn't think I was going to like the falling through the air action sequence that ends up being near the end of the movie, but I actually really did. I actually thought it was quite good and 10 times more believable than anything in Fast 9, which says something, I suppose. So I really like that. Now, the things I did not like about this film, and it can be summed up in really one word: villains. Weak villains. And I mean that for both Taskmaster and the ultimate bad guy behind it all, Ray Winstone's character. So let's start with Ray Winstone's character. It's like, oh, wow, out of nowhere, there's this giant flying city in the sky. And come on. Oh, and look, another secret organization that has infiltrated all levels of government around the world. Okay, so basically you're Hydra Light, right? Yeah, Miller and Miller Light, you had Hydra, and this is Hydra Light. It's just the same thing, just with a different name. It's like, ooh, the big plan. And of course, it all gets torn down at the end and whatever. So I thought that entire character was a waste, which is too bad because Ray Winstone is like a dynamite actor. So it was sad to see that. And Taskmaster was a disappointment. And it's not that they ended up making Taskmaster, it's not a bad little story idea to say Taskmaster ended up being the assassinated daughter of the guy. That's not a bad plot idea. But it wasn't fleshed out. They didn't do anything in the movie to make me care that when the big reveal happened that it was actually the dude's daughter, I didn't care. And there was nothing meaty or juicy for Taskmaster to do. Taskmaster would show up, be really formidable in a fight, cool, and then he's gone. And that was it. It's like, oh, and so when they don't do enough narrative work to make me care that about the reveal, because honestly, by the time they revealed who Taskmaster was, I didn't care. They honestly could have said it was Quicksilver, that it was Pietro, that somehow Ray Winstone got Pietro's body and resuscitated him and connected him into this robot. I mean, I wouldn't have cared because they didn't do any narrative work about it. So I just didn't care. He was just another, robotic kind of villain thing. So it gave no oomph to the story. So yeah, to me, the real weaknesses of this film all revolves around that one word, villains. It's like, ooh, another Hydra. Ooh, Ray Winstone, who's just a pompous guy who can be tricked because of his ego. Seen that before. Taskmaster, didn't care. Nothing narrative about the character. So I was disappointed on all that. But for me, the positives of the film, the chemistry between the two lead characters, the performances, David Harbour's Red Guardian, the family dynamics, good action, the positive of this movie to me significantly outweighed the negatives, to be honest with you. Not enough to make it like what I would consider A-list MCU, but I enjoyed this film quite a bit. I plan on watching it one or two more times, and that's my overall thoughts on Black Widow. Now, let's spend the rest of our time here, guys, taking your thoughts, observations, comments, and questions about Black Widow, shall we? And we're going to start things off here with Brian Crossan, who writes, had problems, but did enjoy the movie. Like that only heard Clint's voice. This was Natasha's movie. Solid performance. Do you think this is the last of ScarJo? No. We're going to see Scarlett Johansson will be back. I'm not saying she's going to be back in a year or 2 years or even 3 years. Just like Robert Downey Jr. I'm not saying Robert Downey Jr. is going to be back next year or in 2 years or in 3 years. I don't know, but he'll be back. Oh, I guarantee you he'll be back. And Scarlett Johansson will be back as well. So yes, I do think she'll be back. All right, next up. We got Anton Riley who writes, so, end credit scene sets up Hawkeye series. Looks like it. Didn't think Yelena would be an antagonist. I loved I gotta say, I loved the post-credit scene. I loved it both in principle that they fast forwarded to quote unquote present day. I love the fact that we had Elaine in there again. Because remember, originally Black Widow was supposed to come out before Falcon the Winter Soldier. So when Elaine shows up, this was supposed to be the first time we saw her, right? This was supposed to be the very first time we saw her. So you got to keep that in mind, but I like that. And I personally love the idea of Yelena being the antagonist for the Hawkeye show. I really like that idea. I narratively, it's compelling from a narrative point of view. And I think the potential action that you could have in that, I think sets it up pretty well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Okay, next up. We've got Sam Fisher who writes, I thought Taskmaster being the daughter was unexpected for me, but was by no means as shocking as Marvel thought it was. Oh, I agree. Yeah. I wasn't, listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I had totally forgotten about the daughter. I had totally forgotten about her. So when they revealed it was daughter, I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't see that coming, but I still don't care. They didn't do anything to make it seem interesting to me. So I agree with you, Sam. I feel like they thought it was a bigger shock moment than it really was. I agree with you. Sam also writes, Taskmaster should have been Wither. Taskmaster should have been Wither, the main villain, or a co-villain, and not the mindless lead henchman that he was. No, I don't care about that. I really don't. It doesn't matter. You can make Doctor Doom the main villain. It doesn't mean that makes it any better. Just look at the Fantastic Four movies. That didn't make those movies any better. It didn't matter if Taskmaster was the main villain, a henchman. It doesn't matter as long as you write it well. Taskmaster as a henchman, if they wrote Taskmaster well, could have been very fun and very compelling and worked. Didn't have to be the main villain or the co-main villain. Didn't have to be any of that for it to work. Because guess what? Even if they made Taskmaster the main villain, they still wrote it crappy, so it wouldn't have made any difference. Wouldn't have made any difference. At least that's my opinion at any rate. All right, next up. Jake C. writes, this reminds me a lot of when they killed Han in episode 7 and then released Solo right after. Really poorly timed movie. Should have come out pre-Infinity War. Yeah, I mean... Listen, I don't know what they're thinking the whole thing is. Like, oh no, halfway through the movie, Natasha's her life's in danger. Oh, well, we know she survives. She has to survive the end of the film. So there's that. Obviously, she doesn't hook up and marry that guy. By the way, that dude, he's from Handmaid's Tale. The guy who gets her all the stuff. This is the first time I've ever seen him in anything outside of Handmaid's Tale. I loved seeing him in that. That was great. But you knew, there's not going to be anything romantic there because we don't see him later. And I don't know why the peculiar timing of it. I don't understand why. But at the end of the day, it was still a good, entertaining movie. So I was fine with it. It's fine. All right. Next up, we've got A-Rod 2006 writes, Yelena Belova, John Walker, what do you think Contessa is up to, and who do you think she's working for? Said she wanted a raise too. I have no idea at this point. I really don't. Like, in the comic, she's also referred to as Lady Hydra. I don't think they're going that route. I really don't. I mean, anything's possible, but I really don't think they're going that route. I'm not even convinced she's a villain. She could be another, Ross. She could be another Thunderbolt Ross in the sense that Thunderbolt Ross sees himself as a hero. Like, he wants the protection of the world. He wants everybody to be safe, but he's got also some pretty bad ideas about what will accomplish that and what won't. Maybe she's another one of those. I mean, I don't know, but I do love seeing Elaine in there. So we'll see where they go with that though. We'll see where they go, but she is getting a good collection, right? She's got John Walker. She's got Yelena, and they're probably going to show her having others as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go with that. James Mutombo writes, thought it was okay. Family dynamics were great. The visual effects were a hit or miss, and Taskmaster was trash. Parts of it were fantastic. I don't know. I think it was better than F9 all around, but levels of ridiculousness. Everything that was ridiculous in this movie, I thought was still 10 times more believable than the stuff they did in Fast 9. And I'm not using hyperbole either. Literally 10 times more believable. All right, Sam Fisher writes, Alexei certainly stole the show. I thought so. But Florence Pugh had the harder job of being likable to the audience, especially when she is going to be the next Black Widow. We'll see. By the way, just let me say this. Everybody's just assuming she's going to be the next Black Widow. I haven't seen Kevin Feige say that. I mean, look, she very well could. Maybe even it's likely, but it's just dangerous to make these assumptions right now. But I will say this, you're right. She had the harder job because you have David Harbour is playing Red Guardian. And again, I thought he stole the movie, but he could be his own he's a side character. I mean, there wasn't as much pressure on him as there was on Florence Pugh, who has to act directly opposite. Basically every minute she's in the movie, I mean, not literally, but almost every minute she's in the movie, she's acting with Scarlett Johansson, one of the best actresses in the world, as one of the most beloved characters in the MCU. And she's got to make her character likable and enjoyable and work. And she kind of does. She does. So you're right. I agree with you, Sam. She had the harder job. I think she did have the harder job. All right, next up. Sam Fisher all writes, and I think she did it perfectly. I agree. I thought she did. I don't know that I'd say perfectly, but she did a great job. I mean, better than most people would have done. All right. Sam also writes, after the end credit scene, I'm certainly more excited for Hawkeye than I was. I'm not going to lie. I am too. I mean, I got to the point where I'm now interested in Hawkeye. But You know me, I've never been terribly interested in either a Black Widow or a Hawkeye standalone stuff. Like, I love those characters in the MCU, but I've never really been interested in their standalone stuff. That end credit scene maybe doubled my anticipation for Hawkeye. Like, I think I'm legitimately excited to see it now. Like, not jumping up and down out of my chair, but I think I can honestly now say something I never said about the Hawkeye series. I'm kind of excited to watch it now. I think that last end credit scene really did a number for it. All right, next up. Sam also writes, the credit sequence was terrifying, and the scene of Yelena and Alexei singing American Pie was heartbreaking. Like I was saying before, everything that had to do with the family and the dynamic of the family all worked for me. And then because there was a callback to that scene earlier in the film, and I thought that was a really, really great moment. I like that a lot. All right, Kick It to the King writes, PS4 Spider-Man Taskmaster would mop the floor with this imposter. Like Mandarin, I guess we'll get badass Taskmaster in 7 or 8 years. I mean, okay, but I would say this. I really don't care. I don't care who the villain is. You could have said the villain was Galactus. I really don't care. You could have said the villain was Eddie, the guy who works at 7-Eleven. If you write it well, it's going to work. If you write it well, it's going to work. So I really don't care that it was Taskmaster. I don't give a shit about Taskmaster. I couldn't give 2 squirts of urine about Taskmaster. I really couldn't. But I was just looking forward to a solid, well-written antagonist, and they didn't give it to us. And that part I found disappointing, especially when the trailers made it look like it really did have some potential there. And that's just kind of my take on it at any rate. All right, thanks for writing that in, Kick It to the King. Next up, Sam Fisher also writes, I thought Scarlett Johansson got overshadowed a little, and neither Ross or the weapons guy, don't even remember his name, were needed. I didn't think Scarlett Johansson got overshadowed at all, to be honest with you. I didn't think Scarlett Johansson got overshadowed in the least. I thought despite the fact that they had the family and they had Yelena and they had the Taskmaster and all that kind of stuff, I still thought every beat of this movie was clearly this is a Black Widow movie. This is Scarlett Johansson's movie. I never once for a second thought she got overshadowed. Now, I do believe like Red Guardian, he had the scene stealing moments in the movie. He did, but I still, that was as an accent. I thought they did a pretty good job of keeping the focus that this is clearly all centered around Natasha. She is clearly the center of this whole movie. And I personally thought they did a pretty good job of that. All right, next up. We've got Sam also writes, overall a really great movie, but you're right, not an S-class movie. Probably meant A class because the S key is right beside the A key. Yeah, not A-list, not prime, not their top shelf effort, but a really good, enjoyable movie. I had a good time with it. All right, next up. Kick It to the King also writes, worst MCU villains in this movie, not even close. I don't know. I completely disagree with you when you say not even close. Because the Dark Elves in Thor Ragnarok, in Thor the Dark World, were pretty damn terrible. Those are pretty badly done things. Also, Yellow Jacket wasn't the strongest villain. So I completely disagree when you say it's not even close. I don't even think they are the worst they've had, but it definitely was a weakness of the movie. On that, we can agree. The villains were definitely a weakness of the movie. All right, next up. Mista47 writes, seems like a movie they felt obligated to make instead of a necessary tale. Letter grade C. It had so much potential and it couldn't live up to them. See, but I think part of that is just the unrealistic expectations of what an MCU movie is supposed to be. Now, let me say this. No Marvel movie ever felt like it needed to be made, in my opinion. These are made because they can deliver some fun and big box office money. That's why all the movies are made. There's never been a movie made in history that needed to be made. But I will agree with you in that first statement that it still felt kind of like, especially with it being told out of order chronologically, it felt like one they felt obliged to make. Like, look, all the other main Avengers, other than Hulk, because there are legal issues, they can't make a Hulk movie. But they featured Hulk and everything else, right? It almost felt like, listen, It's the only female member of the Avengers that we have. I mean, OG, not counting Captain Marvel. Iron Man's had 3 of his own movies. Captain America has had 3 of his own movies. Hulk's been featured a lot. Hawkeye's getting his own series. That also feels a little bit obligatory to me as well, by the way. The fact that they're giving Hawkeye his own series, I feel is kind of obligatory. So yeah, I won't disagree with you that it felt a little bit obligatory. It was better than a C to me. I don't give grades, obviously, but I still thought it was better than a C. All right, next up. Remmer Bulldog writes, I really enjoyed Black Widow. Actually was really good, and I love the family dynamic. Florence Pugh was great, so was Scarlett Johansson and David Harbour, but the weakness was the villains. 8 out of 10. I 1000% agree with everything you just said, Remmer. I thought ScarJo was great, Florence Pugh was great, David Harbour was great, the performances were solid, the inner character dynamics were really good, but the big glaring weakness to me was the villains, plural. Both Taskmaster and the Ray Winstone character. And that's, okay, so it's another Hydra. Oh, you've already got little secret agents implanted in all the big governments in the world. Ooh, yeah, we haven't seen that before in the MCU. And it just gets brought to an end right there and then and there. Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that part was a letdown. No doubt about it, that part was a letdown. All right, next up. Juno Faulkner writes, 1 of 7. Okay, buckle up. Here we go. Juno Faulkner writes, Yelena, Alexei, and the family scenes were definitely the best parts of the movie. I agree. Black Widow isn't a super soldier, so I don't know how she survived half the stunts that happened to her in this movie. I never saw anything to her that I thought, well, that would have killed her. Yeah, I mean, she got the shit beat out of her sometimes, but I never saw anything that happened in the movie that made me think that would kill her. Anyway, in this movie, the CGI was hit and miss at times. As for Taskmaster, why did they put her in a masculine suit of armor? Who cares? Did they have to specifically make a feminine suit of armor? It was a suit of armor. Who cares? I think it would have made more sense to switch first name from Antonia to Melina, give her a more feminine suit, take away the copycat gimmick, and just call her Iron Maiden. I don't like that idea at all. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that's a bad idea. Anyway, I thought Marvel would have learned its lesson with the Mandarin, but I guess not. Also, I wonder why Valentina trying to set up a conflict with Clinton Yelena. Maybe the organization she's with is trying to corner the market on heroes and wants to eliminate old ones, or just have their own running around. Overall, I'd give the movie a B-. I definitely agree. It's not top shelf MCU, but it was more enjoyable than some movies. I would say this. None of us should be jumping the gun here to try to interpret what is the whole motivation of Elaine's organization. We've got nothing to go on. Like, it was literally a 30-second post-credit scene. I need a raise. I want vacation. Here's your target, the person responsible for your sister. She's not really lying. What she said was true in an Obi-Wan way from a certain point of view. But I think there is far too little information that we've been given to start developing or theorizing about what's her overall motivation here. I think they've been specifically and intentionally vague on that. So I really don't know. Your theory, though, there is as good as any other theory. That, maybe they're trying to corner the market on superheroes. I mean, that could be it. I don't know. Maybe. But the whole thing with, I honestly don't think it's an issue. Whoa, why was it a masculine suit? Who the fuck cares? It was a suit. It was a suit. What are they supposed to give it a thinner waistline and put boob molding on it? I mean, to me, that's not an issue at all. That's not an issue at all. So that's fine. I mean, it was a bad character because it was a bad character, not because they didn't give her hips and a booty and huge tits. I mean, that's, who cares? None of that matters. And it's not that wouldn't have made the character, by the way, that wouldn't have made the character any better. Like, not the slightest bit better. And I don't believe this was another Mandarin situation at all. I really don't think this was another Mandarin situation at all. Because honestly, nobody gives a shit about Taskmaster. At least, me and the circles I travel in don't. I'm sure there are some people out there that do, but I never did. All I wanted them was to give us a good, well-written character that we got invested in, that we would love to hate, that we would, feel a sense of dread when that character came on screen. And it was just a battle bot. At the end of the day, it was a battle bot that you gave a little bit of a twist in the narrative to, that you never made us care about. And so it just was a failure of a character. And it didn't matter what you called it. You could have called that character Taskmaster. You could have called that character Doctor Doom if you wanted to. It still was going to fail. So, but anyway, that's just kind of my thoughts on it. Whatever. Who knows? What do I know? What do I know? All right. Next up. Where are we at? Remner writes, Black Widow was so much better than F9. Black Widow wasn't a great movie, but it was a good movie with good action and good family dynamic. Yeah, when you do a movie that's even got better family than Fast 9, then yeah, that says something bad about it. So I agree. I mean, listen, we're not here to measure Black Widow against Fast 9, but I agree. It was definitely a better movie than Fast 9, Remner, at least in my opinion, and clearly your opinion too. All right, next up, Murray Reich writes, I saw the movie and left feeling I enjoyed it, but same time disappointed. Family dynamics, the action, the comedy was great. Taskmaster was a massive letdown. Totally agree. But the end credit scene where we see Valentina with Yelena was awesome. I listen, seriously, 4 for 4 there, Murray. I completely agree with you across the board. Across the board on that. The family dynamics, the comedy worked. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who don't know what they're talking about. Who's like, I don't like MCU because they try to be funny. I'm sorry, guess what? Audiences like to be entertained. Audiences like that. And you can tell somebody is desperate to criticize something when they're criticizing a strength of the movie. So like something that Marvel films actually do a really good job of is their moments of humor. They certainly don't always work, but usually they work. And it adds to the overall entertainment experience. And I agree with you, Murray. I thought the comedy in this film really worked. They didn't try to overdo it. I think they pushed it a bit, but they didn't cross that line. They didn't overdo it. And when they were doing the humor, to me, it worked, particularly with David Harbour. David Harbour just killed it in this. I hated his Hellboy movie, but man, he really killed it in this. The family stuff was great. Villains were a complete waste. Post-credit scene was meaningful and got me excited for an upcoming project. I liked it a lot. Yeah, so I liked on that level. So yeah, you and me, man, completely on the same page with that. And by the way, Murray also sent in like a $20 super chat. Thank you for supporting our channel on that level, man. Really, really appreciate that, dude. Okay, next up, we've got Murray Reich also writes, Natasha seems to be like Dom from Fast and the Furious, where nothing kills her. She survived multiple times from buildings, planes, and a car bomb, but ends up being dead from dropping off a cliff in Endgame. But here's where I will completely disagree with you, Murray. When she gets into fights, she can get the shit kicked out of her. Like, she takes her licks, and her fights will have ebbs and flows, like, except for when she's just taking on random henchmen. When she's taking on random henchmen, obviously she'll get the better of them every time. But like when she's fighting other girls from the room, and she's fighting, Taskmaster, she's finding a way. She gets her ass handed to her at times. Maybe she'll come back at the end and win, or sometimes she just needs to get away. She just needs to figure out a way to get away. That's totally different from Dom and Fast and Furious. Like Dominic Toretto, if Vin Diesel was producing the movie, Dominic Toretto could walk into a bar where the Hulk, Galactus, Thor, Batman, and Superman are all waiting to fight him, and Dominic Toretto's going to just kick the shit out of all of them. You think I'm joking? I'm not. That's the way Vin Diesel would have that go if it was Dominic Toretto. It just is. Whereas with Black Widow, I find the way they treated Black Widow is the same way Tom Cruise treats his character in Mission Impossible. He'll take a beating. He will take a beating. He will be at the disadvantage. He will get setbacks. Not Dominic Toretto. Not Dominic Toretto. Anytime. Anyway. All right, next up. Marie Seifring writes, Natasha downloaded the information about the Black Widows Dreykov had planted around the world, and at least 2 vials of the gas, which released the Widows from mind control. 1 vial to release Taskmaster, 2 she gave to Yelena. Did our Black Widow give Ross the database of names in exchange for her freedom? See, honestly, I'm glad you brought that up, Marie, because that to me was one of the other, I think, a bad decision. Like, first of all, there was no need for her to stay behind. It's not like I get it. At the end, as everybody else is getting away, if Black Widow was like, I'm going to hold them off so the rest of you can get away. But they were all already in the air by the time Ross and his guys got there. She could have easily gotten away with the rest of them. And them not showing how then she gets out of that, I think was a bad choice. It left. I'm glad they had the post-credit scene, because the post-credit scene for me ended the movie on a high note. But if they hadn't have done that, that movie for me would have ended on a low note, like a big question. I was like, what the fuck were you thinking there? That's a bad decision. But your theory as to how did she get out of that, that's not a bad theory, Marie. That's not a bad theory, actually. That maybe she leveraged that, saying, hey, look, I got this, and you're going to need this. And I will give it to you, but I walk. That's a deal that a Ross would make, I think. So that's it. I mean, we don't know that that's the case, but that's actually a really good theory, Marie. All right, next up. Isaiah Campbell writes, watch The Black Window. The Black Window. That's the name of it now. Watch The Black Widow and The Tomorrow War back to back with my family on Friday. We all agreed that we need David Harbour versus J.K. Simmons in a film. LOL. Yeah, I mean, J.K. was great. And you know what? I watched both of those movies close to each other. I mean, I saw Black Widow earlier because I got an advanced screener of it a while ago, but I kind of categorized them both the same way. I don't think either of those two movies were fantastic, but quite entertaining. I like them both. But yeah, J.K. Simmons in Tomorrow War, loved him in that. Absolutely loved him in that. All right. Anonymous by Nature, I like that name, writes, the letdown with the villains may come from them not being as good as they were in X2 when they were Stryker and Jason. That movie was, you know what, Anonymous? Totally fair comparison. That is a totally fair comparison. And you're right, X-Men 2 did it way better. X-Men 2, people forget, because, out of sight, out of mind. X-Men 2 to this day is, I still believe, one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. I still believe, and it holds up. I love that movie. That movie's insanely good. Is it top 5? No. But I would make an argument it's probably still in the top 10, top 11, top 12 greatest comic book movies ever made. So you're right. In both instances, both characters were better fleshed out. They had more relevance when they were revealed. It's a really good comparison, Anonymous. Well done. All right, next up. Ganem McIntyre, who writes, I thought this was actually a pretty good movie. The plot was a little messy, I agree, but the family drama was actually very well done. Overall, it was just nice to see an MCU film again. You know what, dude? And that is one thing we haven't talked about yet. It was just nice to watch a Marvel movie again. And I know we've seen Scarlet Witch in WandaVision. I really liked that a lot. I loved it, actually. I loved WandaVision. Really liked Falcon and Winter Soldier. But to sit down and watch a 2-something hour, totally contained movie with a beginning, middle, and end, a true MCU movie, to watch that again was really fun. That was really fun. Not the best they've done, but really fun nonetheless. And it really finally made, because again, I know Loki's ongoing right now. We had Falcon and Winter Soldier. We had WandaVision. And I've loved the Disney Plus stuff so far, but now to me, it feels like the MCU is back. Now it feels, now y'all might not agree with that, and that's fine. But to me, and I didn't even realize until after I finished watching, it's like, now it feels like the MCU's returned. I feel like we had MCU stuff with WandaVision, Falcon Winter Soldier, and Loki right now, even though they're being done very well. But it was the return of an actual MCU movie that made me feel MCU is back. That's kind of what it felt like to me. Anyway, thanks for bringing that up, man. Next up. Marie Seifring writes, I'm curious how Clint ended up on someone's kill list. Telling Yelena it was because Clint caused Black Widow's death was to motivate Yelena, not real reason. Well, I mean, here's the thing. We don't know, Marie. We don't know. We have simply not been given enough information. Why does Elaine, I keep calling her Elaine, Valentina, but I'm going to keep calling her Elaine. Why does Elaine want Hawkeye eliminated? Now, don't forget, prior to the events of Endgame, Hawkeye was turned into a bad person. He was going around the world murdering a lot of people. Now, granted, they were bad people, but he was doing things outside of the realm of the right he had to do. So he would be on a government list probably. I mean, realistic, he should be given a pass for saving all of humanity. But I mean, so there could be, but again, we don't have enough information to really formulate a real solid thesis about what is it Elaine is doing, what is her motivation, who is it she's working for. I don't think it's Hydra, but we'll see. We'll see where they go. All right, next up. Marie also writes, I wonder if Valentina, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, is connected to criminal organization Hawkeye attack during the blip. Everything leads to 10 Rings. I don't think there's any connection there, but that's not a bad theory. I particularly like the idea that maybe somehow, some way, either directly or indirectly, his in between Infinity War and Endgame escapades where he was murdering a lot of people around the world. I wonder if he murdered somebody and took out somebody that's more closely related to the organization she's working with. But again, not enough information to draw any, definitive conclusions. But I like the theory. I do. I like that theory. All right. Next up, we've got Luis Maya writes and tips in like a $20 super chat. Thank you, Luis, for supporting our channel on that level, man. Hello, John. I love the Red Guardian. Dude, I would go see a Red Guardian movie tomorrow. Like that. Anyway, another MCU character I can cosplay besides Endgame Thor, because no matter what size you are, it still fits. God, seriously. And I will admit, I did not think I was going to like that character in the movie. Like, yeah, I got a grin and I liked the trailers and it still fits. But I thought, you know what, in the context of the movie, this is going to come across as really desperate and it's going to come across as really gimmicky and it's going to come across as really lame. But this is why we leave our expectations at the door. He stole the movie to me. He stole the movie. Not only was he, and he wasn't just a clown, like he had honest, serious moments of heroism and real honest moments of heart to hearts. Like this, when they started singing the song together, to me, that was amazing. They did such a great job with that character. And he's got such an inferiority Captain America complex. I loved this character. I want to see more of him. I really, really do. Actually, Bill 4393 in the live chat put it better. He feels a little bit like Incredibles. He feels a little bit like a Mr. Incredible in a way. And I think you're right. When you go back to him in the first Incredibles movie, there's a little bit of that yearning for the glory days and stuff like that. That's a really good observation, Bill. All right, next up. Where are we at? We are at Marie Seifring also writes, I like the movie. It was both sad and fun. Again, more people mind controlled. I'm looking forward to seeing more of Yelena and Red Guardian in the MCU. I certainly hope. Now, clearly we're getting more Yelena because she's going to be in Hawkeye. But I really hope they don't forget about Red Guardian. Now, I joke about if you made a Red Guardian movie tomorrow, I'd be there. Well, I would. I totally would. I'm not expecting them to make a Red Guardian movie. But I really hope he wasn't a one-off character. They did just such a great job with him. They again, to me, they gave him all the choice moments. They gave him all the biggest laughs. They gave him some of the best moments in the movie. And I really hope that investment that they made in him wasn't for nothing. I really hope we do get. Now, look, if we never get him back again, I'll be grateful that we had him in Black Widow. But I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that isn't going to be the last that we see of David Harbour as Red Guardian. I really want to see more of that. All right, next up. Entertain Nerd writes, my problem with the movie is that it felt more like a setup for Yelena making and the team making Widow. Let me try this again. My problem with movie is that felt more like a setup for Yelena making and the team making Widow the like. Let me try this again. Guys, please proofread what you're sending in. My problem with the movie is that felt more like a setup for Yelena making and the team making Widow the like a side character for the storyline, and there were a lot of editing and cutting problems for me. I disagree. I disagree at all that Black Widow ever felt like a side character. She never did. Every moment of this film, Natasha was absolutely the central character. Everything revolved around her. Yes, it was our introduction to Yelena, absolutely. But Yelena was never the centerpiece of the movie. There was not one moment that she was the centerpiece of the movie. Like maybe if, Yelena was the one to go in and confront Ray Winstone at the end and get the information from him. Maybe then, but even then it was Natasha. Everything revolved around Natasha. Just because other characters were given really, really strong material to do, like David Harbour and her, that doesn't take away from the fact that it was ScarJo's movie. And so I disagree with your assessment on that. Now, some editing and cutting problems, I can get on board with you on that. On that, I can get on board with you. Because, yeah, I do believe there was definitely a few editing choices. I'm like, that was an odd choice. Especially in some dialogue scenes. Like, editing when dialogue is going on should be very natural and easy. And they were making some weird cut choices while dialogue was going on. And that was a little awkward. So I agree with you on that, man. I agree with you on that one. Okay, next up. Let's see here. It's all groovy, writes. Did Red Guardian prove that Steve was running around as Cap in 1984? I don't think so. I think he was making up fish stories. Could be wrong, but I think he was making up fish stories. Obviously, the legend of Captain America was already around, right? Before Steve got pulled out of the ice, the legend of Captain America was around. And then when he did make his triumphant return, but I think everything else was just Red Guardian telling war stories, like fake fish stories. That's how I interpret it. I could be wrong, but that's how I interpreted it. All right, next up. Al Rensha writes, hey, John, how do you feel about the likely introduction of the Thunderbolts now that Valentina has recruited Yelena, Walker, and others to come? I feel nothing about it because we don't know that's what's happening. And if it does happen, it's going to be like anything else. It's going to be, do they write it well? Because listen, over the years, I have come to realize it does not matter what characters you put in a movie. It really doesn't. Makes no difference. You can have a Fantastic Four movie with Doctor Doom as the villain. If you don't write it well, and if you don't execute it well, it doesn't matter who the character is. But you put in a character of Fred from 7-Eleven, but you write it well, and you make it compelling, it's going to work. So how would I feel if they do Thunderbolts? I don't give a shit. I really don't, because it won't make it any good. It won't make it any bad. It won't make it bad either. It's all going to be about how do they execute it. I don't care whether it's the Thunderbolts or the Pea Pants Boys. You can make it the Pea Pants Boys or the Thunderbolts. It doesn't matter to me. All that matters is, do you write it well? Do you execute it well? Because other than that, Doctor Doom has showed us time and time again. Doctor Doom, one of the greatest villains in comic book history. It doesn't matter if you put him in a movie. Won't make a movie good. Won't make it good. So I don't care. It's all going to be about, and we still don't know if that's what they're doing. Everybody's assuming they're going to do Thunderbolts, and they very well may. But if they do it, it won't matter. Any more than it mattered that they put Taskmaster in this movie. All that's going to matter is, do they execute? Because if they don't execute, it doesn't matter who it is you call it. It can be the Pea Pants Boys. It can be the dude from 7-Eleven. If you write it well, it's going to work. You could put Joker in there. You could put Doctor Doom in there. You could put Galactus in there. You could put Apocalypse or Thanos or anybody else you want in there. It doesn't matter. Won't make the movie any better unless you do the work of writing it well, make it a compelling character, make their story fit in with the narrative overall, which they failed to do with Taskmaster. So we'll see how that goes. All right, thanks for that, Al. All right, next up. Al also writes, hey, John, do you think Valentina's working with Ross? No idea. Maybe could see Red Hulk join her team that she's been recruiting. I want Walker to yell, assemble. Well, again, we just don't have enough information at all about what Valentina's doing. I will tell you this. Nobody recruits Thunderbolt Ross. Thunderbolt Ross works for no one. But John, in the comic books, it doesn't matter. The comic books, it doesn't matter. The Thunderbolt Ross they've given us in the MCU, he is recruited by no one. If he thinks for 1 second there's 1% of you that is an enemy of the United States of America, he's going to take you down. He's going to take you down with incredible prejudice. He's going to do that. And he's the Secretary of State. He doesn't work for anybody else except America. That's all Thunderbolt Ross works for, is America. So if they did go that way, and I don't think we need Red Hulk, I don't think we're going to get Red Hulk. But I'm not saying it's not possible. Definitely is. Definitely is. But I don't think they will. I don't think we need them. But if for somehow, some way, they say that Valentina recruits Thunderbolt Ross, they're going to have to do some very, very fancy narrative footwork because the Thunderbolt Ross they have given us in this thing is all America all the time. If he thinks there's 1% of you that is an enemy of America, he's going to take you down, and he works for nobody but America itself. So if they're going to suddenly contradict all that in the MCU, they better do some pretty fancy narrative footwork. So we'll see. We'll see where they're going with that. Okay, next up, we've got, that was Al. Next up, Casey McNatt writes, 1 of 3. Hey, John, I just want your thoughts, I just want your thoughts on your thoughts are, try this one more time. Hey, John, I just want your thoughts on your thoughts are on the whole Valentina thing. Do you think seeing Falcon and Winter Soldier first really helped her appreciate this? Because if Black Widow came out first, like it was supposed to, I don't know. If anybody would be like, who is that? Being introduced in Falcon and the Winter Soldier was probably the right move. Also, didn't Feige say that the shows were their own separate things and you weren't required to watch them? Well, if you ask me, those end credits was setting up Hawkeye, no doubt about that. Okay, couple things there. Number 1, what do I think about Valentina? No thoughts at all. They haven't given us enough information yet. They've literally given us nothing to really build a feasible theory on yet. So for that, I don't know. I simply don't know. I also don't think it made any difference that she was introduced in one post-credit scene before she was introduced in another one. I really don't. I think if Black Widow came out when it was supposed to come out, and we got Valentina in that first, and then Falcon and the Winter Soldier to flesh her out a little bit more, that would have been fine too. But also, Feige is still right. Like, if we didn't have that post-credit scene in Black Widow, it wouldn't have thrown anything. Pardon me, I got the hiccups now. It wouldn't have thrown anything off going into Falcon the Winter Soldier if Elaine showed up. The post-credit scene isn't requiring that. It's not requiring that at all. And even if you never watched Black Widow at all, forget the post-credit scene. If you never saw Black Widow at all they're going to need is a short sequence in in Hawkeye that explains who Yelena is, and the audience won't be lost in the least. They won't be lost in the least. Who the hell was that trying to kill us? It's Yelena. Who the hell's Yelena? She was Natasha's sister growing up in the blah blah room, whatever. They reconnected a couple of years ago, and I think she blames me for the death of Natasha. There, in 10 seconds, the audience would know everything they need to know about Yelena moving forward in Hawkeye. And I guarantee you we're going to get a scene like that. And it won't have been required watching. You are required to see Black Widow in order to watch the Hawkeye series. So yeah, I think everything's still going to work. They've done so. That's one of the brilliant things that Marvel has done with their whole MCU is literally you can step in any time into the MCU and you won't feel lost. That's the main reason, besides them making really high quality stuff, the main reason the MCU is as popular as it is today is because they've made their movies and their shows and their properties that way. That anybody, like nobody feels intimidated. Oh, I want to see Ant-Man 3, but do I have to go back and watch all the MCU movies first? Because there's a lot. No, just jump on board. Just jump on board. They'll make sure in the movie that you know everything you need to know in order to be able to follow along. Some of the nuance is going to elude you, obviously, but you will know everything you need to know in order to enjoy the movie. And because the MCU has made their stories that way, that any new audience member can jump on board at any time, that's just meant more and more people all the time were able to jump on board. And then once they were on board, they're going, okay, I'm going to go back and watch the first Iron Man. Okay, I'm going to go back and watch the first Avengers now, because now they're on board. And that philosophy of Kevin Feige being never make their stuff in a way that is prerequisite to watch something else first in order to enjoy this, that has allowed their audience to continue to grow and grow and grow. And it's the most brilliant thing they've done. It's the most brilliant thing they've done. All right. Thanks a lot for that, Casey McNatt. Next up, 007 Robot Chicken writes. First time I've been to a theater in 2+ years. I'm glad you're able to go back, brother. Glad you're able to go back. Just a really fun film. I loved it, but I wish Taskmaster would have had more than 5 minutes of screen time and one line of dialogue. Not a great villain. Yeah, and again, it's just that's your primary villain. Like, yeah, I get it. Ray Winstone is the main villain, but he's not the primary villain. The primary villain was Taskmaster. And to do it in such a weak way was disappointing. But fortunately, 007, I think the other elements of the movie that worked, the dynamics, the performances, the chemistry of the characters, the family stuff, Red Guardian, solid action sequences, it all outweighed the negative. But yeah, it could have been a really special movie. I think if they had crushed it with the villains, it would have, I mean, it wouldn't have made this movie Winter Soldier, but it would have elevated it maybe into a top 10 Marvel film, but it didn't. And it is what it is. That was the weakness of it. But fortunately, the strengths outweighed the weaknesses. And I'm glad you're able to go back to the theaters, Robot. I'm glad you're able to go back to the theaters. All right, next up. Colin Z writes, I loved the descent sequence at the climax of the film. I enjoyed that way more than I thought I would. I like that sequence more than I thought it would. Unrealistic, obviously, but really thrilling. But again, just slightly believable enough. Just the slightest hint of plausibility that you buy into it. Unlike, a Fast 9, let's take a car with glass and duct tape into outer space. Like, Not even the slightest hint of plausibility. And and that's something that the other Fast and Furious movies did, right? The other Fast and the Furious movies did totally ridiculous things, but all their ridiculous things always had the slightest sliver of plausibility. And as long as you have the even if it was a 1 in a million chance, the slightest sliver of plausibility, it makes the action that much more thrilling because you believe there are stakes. You believe all that kind of stuff. And I felt like everything they did in Black Widow always had that certain degree of plausibility, as fantastical as it was. And that's what made the action work better for me. Anyway, that's kind of my thought. All right, thanks for that, Collins. Next up, PXZ writes, if this movie came out between Civil War and Infinity War with a Team Cap cameo or a mid-credit scene, I think it will get Captain Marvel's box office. Oh, I disagree. I don't think this movie was ever going to get Captain Marvel's box office. I mean, I think it would have helped if it came out at the right time and they didn't do it as a prequel movie. I think that would have helped, but do I think that would have made it $1 billion film, which Captain Marvel was? I don't think so. Like, I never did believe that a Black Widow would be a $1 billion film. I mean, listen, it's an MCU film. I always acknowledge it had the possibility of doing it, but I would never put money on that. But that's just my take on that, PXE. That's just my take. Thanks for sharing yours, man. All right, next up. The Wakandan Forever writes, Taskmaster, how dare you, stealing the Wakandan fighting style. That took me 12 years to learn, LOL. We have history, but great film, Miss Romanoff. Yeah, I really got a kick out of the whole notion that this Taskmaster, which, has connections to the comics, the way this ability, but be able to instantly see a fighting style of an Avenger and instantly be able to take on that fighting style. It makes for a very interesting, or at least gives you the potential to have a really interesting kind of villain, but they then kind of dropped the ball on it. And so it ended up being a little bit of a waste, but I did like the ability. Thanks for sharing that, Wakandan. All right, next up, Evelyn writes, I did really like and enjoy this movie. Love the cast. Florence is a big standout, and it feels like a good deep dive into Natasha. Agree across the board. This was the best character dive into Natasha. We got to see and understand her as a character much better than we have in any of the other MCU things. And on that level alone, I think it really worked. And I think you're right. Florence Pugh was a big standout. I thought David Harbour was. The dynamics, the cast was solid. Yeah, all these things completely went into making that work, Evelyn. All right, next up. Julianne S. writes, Yelena was my biggest pleasant surprise. Loved her dynamic / story with Nat. Story was weaker for Marvel, but walked away enjoying because of the characters. And you know what? This goes back to a conversation, Julianne, that me and Robert were having the other day. Somebody wrote in on the John Campea Show the other day and they were asking, hey, if you had to pick one thing for a movie to have, great characters but weaker story, or a great story but weaker characters, easy, great characters. Because if you have great characters, you can keep me intrigued in the movie, even if the story is weaker. And the fact that it was not the strongest story-wise for the MCU, and definitely not the strongest villains they've ever had, because the characters worked. Because the title character, Natasha, worked so well. Because the new characters, Yelena, Red Guardian, their mother, all worked. Because those characters interacted well. I make the comparison to Supernatural, the TV show Supernatural. Not every season of Supernatural's 15 seasons always had the greatest storylines, let's be honest. But I love the characters. I love Sam and Dean and Crowley and Castiel, and I just love those characters. And if I knew every week, I could just hang out with those characters. So ideally, what you want is strong characters, strong story. But if you had to only have one of them, always take strong characters, because strong characters will carry you through a lot. And I think the strong characters carried this movie. I really do. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. All right, next up. Where are we at? We are at, is that Phil next? Yes. Phil writes, when Yelena's at Natasha's graveside and begins to whistle, oh, that was a good moment. I was half expecting to hear a whistle back. Anyway, I swear I was going to freak out if a whistle would have followed and it was Natasha. Seeing it again a second time, knowing it was coming, I still felt that sensation. Dude, and by the way, Phil super chatted in like $20 for that. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that very much. 100% agree. When she went to that gravesite and you realize, okay, we've now fast forwarded in time to present day, and she did the whistle. I thought I might have said it out loud to my friends who were there too. I'm like, I right there, if you had froze time, if we had paused the movie right there and said, do you want to put money on whether or not Natasha whistles back and Natasha comes out from behind a tree? I probably would have put $5 on it in that moment. I totally thought there was a moment she's going to whistle back. But you know what? Even though the whistle back never came, it was still a really emotional thing that Yelena would just put out that whistle anyway. It reminded me a lot of the callback to the song when Red Guardian and her sang the song they played as children, right? When she was a child. It was a really great moment. I loved it. And God, I really thought, nickname took forever in the live chat says, I really thought there was going to be a whistle back. I did too. I really did think there was going to be a whistle back. Didn't come, but that's okay. I still thought the whistle in and of itself was a really beautiful moment. Anyway, thanks for sharing that, Phil, and I totally agree with you. All right, next up. CMG 2491 writes, one of two. Absolutely love the movie. Action was great. Family dynamic was surprisingly deep, but the Taskmaster reveal was just god-awful, tragic misuse. Yep. And listen, let's be honest. The MCU has been killing it with their villains lately. I mean, Loki was always a great one. Thanos was fantastic. They've done some good jobs, but the strength of the MCU, and Red Skull, obviously, but the strength of the MCU has always been, a little questionable, other than those highlight ones we just talked about. Whether you're talking about Malekith or Warmonger, not Warmonger, what was the name of Jeff Bridges' character in the first Iron Man? Why am I freezing on it right now? Ironmonger? It was Ironmonger. That's what it was. I'll wait to see. There's about a 30-second delay. Let's see if any of you guys put in Ironmonger. I mean, you guys are mentioning Killmonger. Killmonger was obviously one of their stronger ones as well. But, you know, out of the 20-plus movies, they've had some weaker ones. And Bucky was the first one to write in Ironmonger. Then MK Sound, then Uncanny. Yeah, so Ironmonger wasn't a great villain. Freaking Mickey Rourke was a terrible villain. Malekith. I mean, they haven't had a history of that. And unfortunately, this one wasn't very strong either. Really too bad, because I would say this, there's no other giant glaring weakness in Black Widow not that they did everything perfectly, but there's no giant glaring weakness in Black Widow other than the villains. If the villains had been at least not the best, they didn't have to be Killmonger or Thanos level, but if they had just been really serviceable villains, I think we're talking about Black Widow as a whole in much more glowing terms. But the fact of the matter is, they were weak. And so we talk about the way we do. Anyway, CGM also goes on and writes, was surprisingly deep, but the Taskmaster reviews just got awful. Tragic misuse of Olga Kurilenko. Feel this was M. Night level twist. Oh, I didn't think so at all. It was a very simple thing. It wasn't an M. Night thing. Just meant for shock value. Otherwise, why make Taskmaster look like the man in the suit? Who cares? Irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Listen, so many people were guessing that it was going to be a female character. Like, why did they have to make the battle armor have a nice thin waist with a big butt and boobs? It's irrelevant. That part's completely irrelevant. Doesn't mean anything. Olga Kurilenko, yeah, she's never really made it big. I mean, I really liked her in the Hitman movie. I really liked her in that. And not a lot of people know this, but Olga was actually the runner-up to play Wonder Woman behind Gal Gadot. She was the runner-up. I still remember, and now, again, I actually don't think Olga is a tremendously talented actress, to be honest with you. Like, I've never been tremendously impressed with her work. But I remember when the news first came out about the final 3 actresses that were up to play Wonder Woman, I just remember looking at Olga was one of them. And of course, Gal was one of them. And I can't remember who the third one was right now. But I remember looking at it and going, none of these are really strong actresses. Like, you don't need a big famous name. Doesn't even have to be a big famous name, but give us somebody who's turned in like great solid performances to lead a character like Wonder Woman. I remember looking at it going, and Olga was one of them. But again, I at least liked her in the Hitman movie. Even if the Hitman movie wasn't great, I liked her in that. But yeah, she's never been I've never seen her anything, Olga, that made me particularly, somebody's mentioning her in Quantum of Solace. Again, at best, I could say she was passable in Quantum of Solace. I mean, sexy as hell. Olga Kurilenko is sexy as hell. I mean, no doubt about that. But yeah, I never just thought I just never thought she was a particularly strong actress. But that's just me. It was still good to see her pop up in here, though. It was still good to see her pop up. All right, next up, we've got Remmer Bulldog, right? Taskmaster felt like a Winter Soldier ripoff. It just did not work. I didn't feel like there was enough similarities to call it a ripoff, to be honest with you. But just did not work. The fight scenes were cool, but that was the most disappointing thing about the movie. I really enjoyed the other parts of this movie. And I think we're now seeing, right, we're all seeing the pattern here. Not everybody, but the majority of us who watched this movie were like, good movie. God, they really blew it with the villains. Thank goodness everything else was as strong as it was, because the villains, they really dropped the ball on them. That seems to be the common refrain for all of us, Remmer. That seems to be the refrain. I don't think it was a Winter Soldier ripoff. I never felt that myself at all, but yeah, it was definitely the big letdown. All right, Fanblaze71 writes, Fangblaze71 writes, in my opinion, Black Widow is a good movie, but bad for Marvel standards. And did Ross just let her go at the end? Again, I liked the theory that was either Willow or Marie earlier on who gave the theory that maybe she bartered with him, gave him all the information that she got from Ray Winstone. Maybe she fought her way out. Maybe she snuck her way out. I think it was a mistake not to show it. So who knows? Don't know. And I think you're right. Look, I still think it was good for Marvel standards, but it wasn't top shelf. It was a good, entertaining, enjoyable, fun little movie. Could have been much better with strong villains, but in their absence, still a good, solid movie. And so, not top shelf Marvel, but even by Marvel standards, I think we still call it a good movie. Yeah, I would still call that it anyway, Fangblaze. All right, Casey McNatt writes, all right, 1 of 4. Hey, John, I actually haven't sent in my thoughts on this movie just yet, so here it goes. Overall, I thought this movie was a blast. The family dynamic was very good, completely agree. I loved Yelena, I completely agree. He liked it so much, he sent it in twice. All right, 2. And David Harbour's Red Guardian, I thought they were pretty much the main highlights of the movie. I agree. I can understand people's view about the second part about the movie and thought about Taskmaster being a weak villain, but overall, I didn't care. In my opinion, it was just great being able to see a Marvel movie. and 404 on the big screen again. It was very fun and enjoyable, and I had a good time. So thanks for all you do, letting us talk about these and bring on the filthy. Well, thank you so much for that, Casey. And again, completely across the board, I agree. You know, ScarJo was great. She always brings it. I gave us a better character look at Black Widow and Natasha than we ever had before. The satellite characters, the Red Guardian, the mom, the sister, all worked well. Florence Pugh did an outstanding job under very, very tough circumstances. The humor of it, the action was solid, but man, you can't undersell how much of a disappointment it is that the villains really didn't work, because this movie could have been really special. It was still good. It's still good, and I liked watching it, and I give it thumbs up. I like this movie. But knowing how special the movie could have been, if the villains had been strong, because I mean that's one of the most important things in action movies, a good, strong antagonist. Like, do we still talk about Die Hard today if it didn't have the villain that it had? If Hans Gruber is not the villain, and he wasn't written the way he was written, and he wasn't as good of a character and fleshed out, and the way it interacted with our hero, stuff like that, do we still talk about Die Hard today if it wasn't for Hans Gruber? I'm not convinced we are. Does Star Wars become one of the most pop culturally defining movies of all time if it wasn't for Darth Vader? I don't know that it is. Villains are so important. And as good as the movie was, it's also a little disappointing to think about that it could have not just been a really good, entertaining, solid movie. It could have been something really special had they nailed that part. They didn't, and it's all right. Everything else in the movie worked really well. All right, thanks for sending that in, Casey. Next up. Fangblaze also writes, I think I'm the only one who didn't care for most of the action in this film. I'd rather have fewer but longer fight scenes than a ton of 5-second fights. To me, that's not important. To me, what's important is the quality of what you're getting. I don't need a longer chase scene if the chase scenes are great. I don't need longer jokes as long as the jokes are great. I was going to say something else, but I've decided to filter myself. A little bit of self-censorship is always good, folks. A little bit of self-censorship is always good, but I'll let you imagine what it was I was going to say. But listen, and there was a good amount of action. Would it have been better? I don't know. Let's for argument's sake say there was 30 minutes of action in the movie. Would it have been better if it was 2 15-minute action sequences? I don't know if that's necessarily better. All I care about is what you're delivering good? And I thought the action was solid. I mean, and it didn't work for you. That's okay. It's all subjective. Just because a lot of the action worked for me doesn't mean it needed to work for you. And your opinion on the matter is no less and no more valid than mine. So we just saw that a little bit differently. And that's cool. But I personally thought the action worked. I did. I enjoyed it. All right. Next up. My Comic Planet writes, one of two. Scarlett Johansson has come out recently criticizing the sexualization of her character in past movies. But in those movies, her character without a doubt used her sexuality to her advantage. That's always the excuse made with every one of these types of characters. Anyway, it was actually part of her mystique. So why is she now doing an about face? Very strange. Listen, Comic Planet, we're here to talk about the movie Black Widow, not about Scarlett Johansson's comments about something that's completely not related to this, to be honest with you. And listen, she's not wrong. There were times that let's be honest. They did over sexualize Black Widow. They did. Sometimes when it was like she was supposed to semi-seduce Tony Stark, that's understandable. That's narrative. But then there were a lot of times that they didn't. I mean, it didn't bother me at all, but she made a point of it. And the reality is she's not wrong. She's not wrong. But it's not like she's coming and saying, I hated that I did that, and I wish I never joined the MCU, and I wish I... She didn't say that, right? So it was her observation. That's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with it. All right, next up. John Birch writes, one of two. I really like the movie, but I do have to admit having a problem with the overt politicization of the plot. Woke. Okay, just so you know, John, my starting assumption is anybody who uses the word woke is pretty much a moron. Just so you know. So when somebody uses that word, I just assume they're not very intelligent. Just saying. Okay, anyway. Having a problem with the overt politicization of the plot. Woke. By the way, you're completely wrong about that. I mean, you have to have an agenda to see this movie and think it had that, because I didn't see that at all. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for women's equality in films, lifting women up. You know what that's kind of like? That reminds me of racists going, hey, I have friends who are black. That's what that sounds like to me. Anyway, don't get me wrong, I'm all for women's equality in film, lifting women up, but not by bringing men down. This movie never did that. For example, every single bad person in the movie is a man. Do you really want me to go through a laundry list of all the comic book movies where all the villains are men? Do you really want to do that? I guarantee you your favorite comic book movies where all the villains were men. Anyway, and they did it in Black Widow. Oh, that must mean they have a political agenda. Anyway, for example, every single bad person in the movie is a man. No female villains by choice. In fact, no females die in this movie, but all the guys die. Makes no sense. Okay, John, let me pull one out of my ass here. What is a movie that's generally considered to be the greatest film? A lot of people, like I think the first Avengers is the greatest comic book movie of all time. But what's the other one that most people point to? Dark Knight, right? A hell of a lot of people consider Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight the greatest comic book movie ever made. Okay, guess what? Every single villain in that film is male. I just want to see how prejudiced you are. Do you call Dark Knight a woke movie? Is it anti-men because all the bad guys? Because listen, you just said there, it's by bringing down men. For example, every single bad person in the movie is a man. Dark Knight did the same thing. Two-Face, man. Joker, man. The head of all 5 of the criminal families, men. Every villain in that movie was a man. So are you saying that The Dark Knight was anti-men and trying to bring men down because all the villains in the film were men? Because unless you're being hypocritical, you have to say, since Black Widow had all male villains, it was an anti-men agenda. Dark Knight had all male villains. Hell, most comic book movies you could point to have all male villains. Hell, the only female character. And now, are you going to say that The Dark Knight was anti-women? Was it? Because the only female character in The Dark Knight was a damsel in distress who gets blown up. The only female character in The Dark Knight was nothing more than a weak little damsel in distress who got blown up. Was The Dark Knight an anti-woman movie? Obviously it wasn't, but by your logic, by your fucked up logic, Dark Knight was anti-women. It was anti-men because all the villains were bad guys, like all of them. All of them were bad guys. And it also has to be anti-women because there was only one little damsel in distress girl and she got blown up. So be consistent. Admit your prejudice, admit your agenda, and stop bringing your agenda into these movies and seeing what you want to see and then using idiot words like woke. Okay? Using idiot words like woke. Just stop. Or be consistent and come out and say, Dark Knight hates men because all the bad guys were men, and then say The Dark Knight is anti-women because it only had one little damsel in distress woman who got blown up in it. Because if you're not going to do that, then you're being a hypocrite. At the very best, you're being inconsistent. So just admit you have an agenda, just admit you have your prejudice, and just admit that you're trying to bring your agenda into this movie. Because guess what? Lots of comic book movies have all male villains. A lot of them do. And most comic book movies only have helpless little damsel in distress women. Does that mean they were anti-women? I don't think so. Not at all. So when they finally do give us a female-led one, and by the way, this movie gave all the best lines and all the best moments to a male character. Are they anti-women? Because believe me, I can hear it now. There are probably people going out there, Marvel hates women. Why? Because even in a Black Widow movie that's supposed to be about a female character, they gave the best scene-stealing lines and moments to a male character with Red Guardian. They gave him all the best moments. At least I've been saying that for the whole show. Does that mean they hate women? No. So everybody just needs to take that giant fucking stick out of your puckered up asshole and stop bringing your agendas into a movie. Just go into the movie and watch it and stop with your bullshit. Anyway, that's it. Next up, Digital Inspire writes, one of two. I didn't care that Taskmaster was female, but the issue I had was before taking off the helmet, you could clearly tell the person was a guy from his build, but as soon as he takes off the helmet, to reveal it's a female, you could see the build was now significantly different. It just felt wrong and inauthentic. And well, okay, so this is obviously John again. Again, you're a moron if you use the word woke. Is this what we have to look forward to in every MCU movie? By the way, idiotic. It's a battle suit of some sort. She's obviously half cyborg at this point. It makes no difference. And I'm not going to waste any breath on you. Fangblaze71 writes, one thing that bothers me a lot is shaky cam. This movie had way too much unnecessary shaky cam, especially in the second half. I will say this, Fangblaze, I did notice a little bit of it, but shaky cam, you got to understand, shaky cam used to be an absolute plague on action movies. You know what was one of the worst at that? The Bourne movies. They got a little bit better in the last one or two movies, but the Bourne movies were really bad for shaky cam. And there was a long period of time in action films where directors didn't know actually how to create good tension in an action sequence. So, you know, it'll feel realistic. Shake the camera. And it was a total plague. I did notice some of that in Black Widow, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it used to be in days gone by. But I agree with you. I think there was a little bit of that in there, but for the most part, I was always able to clearly see and clearly understand the action for the most part. But I hope this doesn't become a trend. I really do want them to eliminate shaky cam. I hate shaky cam and stuff. And I agree with you, not to as much of a degree as you believe, but they did bring a little bit of that into this movie, and I didn't like when they used it at all. All right, next up. Kyle Arking writes, love Black Widow's homage to Moonraker. There was a little bit of that, wasn't there? Dreykov is Drax, Taskmaster is Jaws with that silver smile. Red Room is a space station. Nat Free Falls. There was a little bit in that. I had several people kind of commenting to me that as well, that they recognized that in there as well. So I think you're right on target there, Kyle. I really do. All right, next up. Chronophobia writes, I enjoyed the movie way more than I expected, but personally, I felt like Scarlett Johansson was overshadowed by Florence Pugh. Yelena was a standout. I disagree. I thought Yelena was great. I did. I thought she was great, held her own. Again, the task that Florence Pugh was given was not an enviable one, but she did it. But at the end of the day, don't let the surprise of that overshadow the acknowledgement. I still believe ScarJo was the center of the movie. Now, that's just my perception. It's all interpretive. It's all subjective. But I was really looking for this movie to deviate away from its core character and make it about somebody else. And I never felt like they did. I always felt they kept... Natasha was the movie. All the most important stuff was connected to her. All the pivotal scenes revolved around her. It was about her. And all the other characters just kind of were orbiting around the Natasha character, including Yelena. But I mean, if she was a standout character for you, awesome. Like, I also thought the standout character was Red Guardian. I'll go see a Red Guardian movie tomorrow. But you know, that's all our own interpretation of a Chronophobia. So you have yours. All right, next up. David Ullman writes, biggest LOL moment. The amount of tranks is to take down David. That moment was great. The first trank goes in. Ha ha. You think that's gonna... I'm not gonna lie. I laughed my guts out at that. I thought that moment was awesome. I thought that was great. Just the way he laughs it off when the first one goes in, and then like 30 or 40 or 50 get thrown in there, and then he drops. That was pretty great. I enjoyed that. Thanks for reminding me about that, David. All right, next up. Foundamentalist writes, Ray Winstone as Harvey Weinstein was amazing. I never thought of that, dude, but I think you're completely right. Again, you know what really, I mean, look, it's been a common theme of today's shows. They blew the villains. They absolutely completely dropped the ball on the villains. What really makes it especially unfortunate is the fact that you had an actor of the caliber of Ray Winstone there. And full marks to them for going out and getting Ray Winstone to be in it. But the fact that you had an actor of that caliber, if you had written that character well, that could have been a juicy, juicy villain. Could have been a completely juicy villain, but you're right. I hadn't thought of it. It was kind of him doing his best Harvey Weinstein. All right, next up, Remmer Bulldog, and this will be the last question we take, guys, before we take a little bit of a break here. Remmer writes, hey, John, overall, Black Widow as a success at the box office, and with most critics liked Black Widow, and the audience really liked Black Widow. I mean, that's true. I was actually surprised to see, let me see if I can bring it up here. Black Widow, Rotten Tomatoes. Like, I wasn't surprised that the critic score was quite good. The critic score is sitting at 80%. What I was actually quite surprised by was that the audience score, the verified, remember, by verified, that means Rotten Tomatoes has verified that the people submitting a score had actually bought tickets through Fandango to see Black Widow. They actually watched the movie. Not like the way Rotten Tomatoes used to be, where anybody could just come and review bomb it, even if they've never seen the movie. They only accept now scores for people that they can verify saw the movie. I was surprised to see that the audience score was like 92%. I would have guessed it was going to hover around the 75%, like still very good. I thought it was going to hover around the 70 to 75% mark, which would have been very good. But I was not anticipating seeing a number like 92%. That was surprising to me, which doesn't mean that 92% of the people loved the movie, but it at least meant that over 9 out of every 10 people who saw it at least liked it. And I was honestly surprised to see the number that high. I thought it would have been a little bit lower than that. All right. With that down, we are now going to take a bit of a break, guys. I'm going to take 5 to 10 minutes here, go get my drink, rest up my voice. Now, I'm going to let you guys know that during the break here, this is your last chance. If you want to send in a thought, comment, observation, review, critique, question, whatever, using the super chat feature here on YouTube, and that's the only way we take them here on these spoiler reviews, you got another 1 or 2 or 3 minutes to do it, because during this break, I'm going to turn off the super chat feature because I want to make sure we get through all the questions that you guys sent in. And the only way we can do that is if I eventually at some point turn off the super chat feature. So go ahead. Send in your thoughts, comments, questions, observations, whatever. Do it. You got 2 or 3 minutes to do it. Give me about 5 or 10 minutes here to take a little bit of a break. Talk amongst yourselves. Go use the bathroom. Grab something to eat if you want. Don't go anywhere, guys. We will be right back. All right, guys, and we are back. Thank you so much for your patience and indulgence as I took a little bit of a break there. Had to go and get my drink refilled, had to go do something, pour some chemicals into my pool, had to pet my dogs, rest my voice up for a bit, but now we're back and ready to go. Let's keep on firing through the questions that you guys have sent in. We're going to start things back up here with Levi R., who writes, John, with Black Widow making $60 million on Disney Plus alone, would you count that as a win? Plus making $80 million in the weekend box office. So, yeah, this is interesting. Although, I mean, we're really here to talk about spoiler discussion for Black Widow. But making $60 million, that means about 2 million people ordered Black Widow to watch at home. That's not bad. But here's what's really telling. This is the first time that Disney has actually let people know the numbers for how many people rented the movie. Because they've done, what, 3 or 4 other premium access things, and they've never let people know what the numbers are. So obviously, all of them were much lower than 60 million. Significant. I mean, the Mulan one I heard was a total disaster. I think they were also very disappointed in the numbers they got for Cruella. Not Cruella. Was it Cruella? I can't remember now. Anyway, they've all been. But 60 million, yeah, I would consider 60 a win. But if all you could get was 2 million people, 2 million households to sign up for the first MCU movie in years, I still can't consider that a win. 80 million box office makes it the #1 box office result since the pandemic era. It's the biggest opening weekend since Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. So yeah, I think overall Disney has to look at this as a win. I think they do. All right, next up, we go to Levi also writes, do you think they will continue with premiere access for bigger movies? Again, we're not here to talk about that stuff. We're here to talk about Black Widow. Anyway, for bigger movies, basically anything Marvel, because if you can make 50 to 80 million on Disney Plus and whatever at the box office feels like a win. Again, I don't know that they're going to be able to continue to do this. And this is the first one they've done out of all the ones that they've done that have actually not been an embarrassment. Because they've been so embarrassed by their results so far that this is the first time they've ever come out and announced the numbers. And it had to be for the first MCU movie in years. But do I believe they'll continue? Yeah, I believe they'll continue. All right, Peter Cunnington writes, boiling lobster is illegal in the UK now. I have no idea what that means. Next up, Black Rice 19 writes, I love that moment when Natasha yells, Yelena, when Natasha tells Yelena it was real to her as well. Great performance emotion in that scene. I thought the movie was just okay. I thought the movie was a little bit better than okay. I thought the movie was good. It was solid. It was entertaining, but it was well short of what you would call, top tier MCU. It didn't come with that greatness factor, which I think just better villains would have elevated it to that greatness factor. But I think to this moment, Black Rice, I still believe that was the biggest weakness of the film, was the villains. All right, next up. Curtis writes, "Hey, John, big fan of yours. Thank you, Curtis. I appreciate that. Wanted to ask if you think we'll see Yelena in any upcoming MCU films. I know she'll be in Hawkeye, but hoping she finds a place in Cap 4. How likely do you think that is?" Well, there's literally no connection between this character and Falcon, or Sam, now carrying the name Captain America, even though there is only one Captain America, but he now carries the name of Captain America. There's no real connection between those characters. I mean, there's obviously more of a connection with Hawkeye, but there's really no other connection there. So I doubt for Captain America 4. It's hard to say. I'll say this. My guess is that we will see Yelena in a movie. I think we will. So beyond the Hawkeye series, my guess, and it's only a guess right now, for all we know, Yelena dies in Hawkeye. For all we know, right? But I will go out on a limb and say, yes, I do believe we will see her not only pop up in an MCU series on Disney+, I believe we will see her pop up in a movie. Whether that's true or not, we'll have to wait and see. And by the way, our friend My Comic Planet sends in like a $10 super chat badge in the live chat just to be supportive. Thank you, My Comic Planet. I appreciate that, man. All right, next up. Chelsea Nagy writes, "Okay, crazy theory, but is there any chance the Captain America that Red Guardian fought was actually Isaiah Bradley, since Cap was in the ice?" Again, I think, and there's not enough information to back this up with. I think that was him just telling a giant fish story. Like, even his daughters didn't believe the story. I think that was him just making up a total story. I could be wrong, and you could be right about that. It's possible. But even the year doesn't match up, because he would have been in prison at that time, I think. At any rate, I think it was just him making up stories. But we'll find out. Maybe they could make a connection there, Chelsea. That might be a good observation. All right, Blake Studwell writes, "Did you find the scene where reveal they had a plan all along by face swapping to be cheap storytelling? It worked in Mission Impossible, but not here." No, actually, I actually thought that worked. It got me because, listen, she's obviously super advanced, super genius scientist, her adopted mother, right? Super advanced, who would have been prepared for almost any kind of contingency. They had enough time to execute it. I thought it worked. Maybe not as well as in Mission Impossible, but I actually thought that worked. I mean, there are a number of things in this movie I did not think worked, but that was one of the ones that I thought worked. I never thought twice about that, because I was like, oh, like when it actually happened, like, okay, then I got it and then it worked for me. So yeah, I didn't think it was cheap storytelling. I thought it worked really well, but that's just kind of my take on it. Didn't work for you? That's totally cool, Blake. All right, next up. Cameron Nelson writes, "I don't have an issue with them, hold on a second. I don't have an issue with them making Taskmaster a female. My issue is the making Taskmaster a totally different character and taking away from everything cool about the character, like his abilities. Here's the thing, Cameron, something you and all comic book fans need to understand and accept. The comic books are the comic books. The movies are the movies. If you had a character you like that's coming up in a future MCU thing, but you're only going to like it if they do exactly what they do with them in the comic book, you're always going to be set up for disappointment. I don't give two squirts of urine that they didn't do with Taskmaster in the movie that they do him with in the comic books. My issue was that whether they kept it the same as the comic or completely different from the comic, you still gotta write a compelling character. Because if they did everything just like he was in the comic book, it still would have been shit. Because they didn't write him well. It still would have been shit. It wouldn't have made the movie one bit better if they had done him exactly like it was in the comic book. It would have gone counter to their story. It still would have not fleshed them out. They still wouldn't have done this. Everything that went into making this character a failure in this film would still have made the character a failure in this film. Doesn't matter whether you did him like they did him in the comic book or not. And that's the thing. I keep getting in trouble, and I know it's a totally unpopular thing for me to say, but you got to understand the comic books are the comic books, the movies are the movies. The movies and the Disney Plus shows will take influence, obviously, from what they do in the comic books, but they will, in every instance, we see them also massively deviate. The question becomes, whether they stay pretty close to the source material or deviate a lot from the source material, do you write it well? And do you make it compelling? Because you can make it compelling either way. Staying true, deviating, doesn't matter. Can all be done great. Or it can be a total failure. And the fact that they just made a bad story for this thing and didn't make the character compelling is what made it bad. And if they had just made it as more identical to the way he was in the comic book, still would have been failed. Still would have failed. Wouldn't have made a difference. At least that's my take. But what you and I both agree on was that Taskmaster was a big failure in the movie. And listen, I have read that there are people out there who really like Taskmaster in the movie, and that's great. I'm not trying to yuck on your yum. If you're somebody who enjoyed Taskmaster in that movie, awesome. That's great. And I'm not trying to rain on your parade at all. But it's my show, and I have to give you my opinion. My opinion was that the character was a complete failure. And because they just didn't give it the narrative attention that they should have given it. But that's just my take on it at any rate. All right, next up. Super AJS writes, I really did enjoy the Taskmaster fight scenes. Hey, look, I'll give it that. I will concede to that when the fights were actioning, and strictly speaking in terms of the action was enjoyable with Taskmaster. That I enjoy. I particularly like the first time on the bridge when him and Natasha confront each other. I particularly like that action sequence. It felt good, but again, they never went anywhere with the character, and that became disappointing. All right, Adam Henson writes. Where are we at here? Hold on a second. Adam Henson writes, there were so many possibilities they could have done with Taskmaster, but was completely wasted with some cheap reveal that didn't even need to happen. It's not that the reveal was cheap. The reveal was well done. It's just what they revealed was useless. We had a brief glimpse early in the movie that Natasha blew up a little girl. And we know that for Natasha, that's something that eats at her. Okay, that's fine. The reveal was fine. It's what they revealed that was a waste. They never made me believe for a moment that Natasha would feel an onus to save this girl. Like, to me, it's like, okay, she's now programmed. This girl is going to kill you and try to kill your sister and will try to kill everybody else and is going to try to maintain this evil plot that Ray Winstone had, and it's going to blah, 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 blah. You cannot convince me that Black Widow wouldn't have known, I need to eliminate this girl. Don't let her out of the prisoner at the end, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It was just so badly set up and so badly executed. And that is unfortunately something now, fortunately, all the other great things of the movie stood out really, really well and really positively, but that is always something that I really think is going to haunt this movie. I think that's something that's really going to haunt this movie. All right, next up. Honorog writes, Loki had first mentioned Dreykov's daughter in the first Avengers during the Black Widow interrogation scene. Awesome to how everything matters in the MCU. I'll be honest with you, Honorog, I don't even remember that. That's my favorite all-time comic book movie, and I don't even remember that. Do you guys in the live chat, do you guys remember them mentioning Dreykov's daughter? I don't even remember the scene. Now, the first thing I'm going to have to do today when the stream is done is I'm going to have to go and load up Avengers and see if that's actually mentioned there. Mighty Tank, Major Jackson, Bucky, everybody else is saying, yeah, that's in there. I totally don't even remember it. That is a cool tie-in. I still right now thinking of the scene, I don't even recall it. But if that is the case, and everybody in the live chat seems to be affirming what you're saying, that is a really cool tie-in. Very well. It still doesn't change that the villain was bad, but it is a very, very cool tie-in. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, man. I don't remember that. All right, next up. Sean Kongama writes, Dreykov gave me some Godfather vibes, in bad ways, especially sitting in his chair. Also, I love the opening credits, a great example of show, not tell. Yeah. I agree with you on that. I thought the opening of this film was particularly strong. I really did. I thought the opening was very strong. You know, the more I think about it, I'm becoming even more polarized on this in my own mind. The more I think about this movie, the more I really like a lot of the things in it. And the more I really dislike, borderline hate the things they did badly in it, aka the villains. I'm becoming even more polarized in my own mind about that. But yeah, that opening stuff was really, really good, Sean. Completely agree with you on that. Okay, next up. We've got Orange Grove 55 writes, Disney saying $60 million for Disney Plus Premier Access alone. This is huge. Yes and no. The first Marvel film in over 2 years, and you managed to get 2 million households to watch it. It's a win. It's a win. I'm not going to take that away. But again, what it really highlights to me is how big of a failure all their other premium access movies were that they never mentioned officially. I've heard through back channels they've been big failures, but this is the first time they've ever come out and acknowledged how much money a movie made. So all the other ones made significantly less than that. And all it took was to have the first MCU movie in years to do it. But it is a win nonetheless. It is a win nonetheless. All right, next up. Super Wonder Bat writes, I like the name. So, do the Avengers give press conferences about their missions? Don't know. Because how else would Dreyfus know about Vormir? Do the Avengers have a traitor? No, this has come up before. This came up in WandaVision. This is the same question that came up in WandaVision, all that kind of stuff. It's like, wait a minute, how do people know what happened during those events? I think the Avengers, especially Cap, would have felt that the world needs to know. This is what happened. You can't keep that a secret. Like, even when, like, at the beginning of Endgame, when Cap is doing the group therapy session and goes, if that's the case, if we're not going to go on living, then Thanos may as well kill all of us. That right there tells us that they let the world know everything. That the world knows everything. You lost your loved ones many of you lost 5 years of your existence. The world was put into upheaval, and the world has a right to know what happened, how it happened, and how it all came back. And just that one scene in Endgame alone is just revealing that they told the world about Thanos. I have no doubt they would have told everybody in government. There would have been government inquiries, and there would have been house committees and blah, blah, blah. So again, these are good questions, Super Wonder Bat, but it's the same questions that came up in WandaVision. They definitely would have let the world know exactly what happened because they would have felt the world deserved to know. The world is who was affected by it. They would have had a right to know. All right, next up. Good question though. Next up. Fangblaze71 writes, do you think they will redo Taskmaster in the future? I don't think so. Future, kind of like they are going to do with Mandarin and Shang-Chi compared to Iron Man 3. Nah, it's like they even let people know after Iron Man 3, they had done a short film where you had Sir Ben Kingsley in prison as Trevor, and the real Mandarin breaks him out. So they foreshadowed that years ago. This is nothing like that. That there's actually a real Taskmaster. No, they're not going to do that. And I'll be honest with you, nobody cares about Taskmaster. Like no average movie fan who doesn't know anything about the comics has even ever heard of Taskmaster. I don't think there's an important thing to there. He's not nearly as important in the comics as, say, Mandarin was. So no, I don't think they will. I don't think we've seen the last of Dreykov's daughter. But I don't think they're going to redo Taskmaster. Listen, anything's possible. This is the MCU. Anything's possible, but I don't think they're going to do that. All right, next up. Let's see. Clark00 writes, I love Taskmaster. See, there are some people who really like Taskmaster. I love Taskmaster visually. Seeing her fight different heroes was something I was looking forward to and really enjoyed. It just feels like they didn't land the character quite right by the end. It was just hard to care. Listen, I'll go further than that, Clarkser. It wasn't just that they didn't land the character right. They never gave a runway or a takeoff, let alone a landing to the character. It was just, okay, there's this Taskmaster protocol. Okay. Oh, side note, Black Widow, in trying to take out Dreykov, also killed his daughter. Okay. Taskmaster is Dreykov's daughter. Okay, I'm sorry. We're just jumping right to that, are we? We're just jumping right to that. Yeah. So I agree they didn't land the character, but again, they never gave her a runway and they never gave her a takeoff. It was just like, oh, by the way, Taskmaster is Dreykov's daughter, and it's not even really Dreykov's daughter. It's really a computerized, cyborgized, mind controlled, mind wiped kind of sort. So even then, there's even less to care about. And I never believed for a second that Black Widow would threaten the lives of everybody, knowing what the Taskmaster was now, that she would let Taskmaster out of that prison at the end just to pursue and maybe kill her later. Just to me, it's a big loss. But hey, man, if there were elements of you, and look, Taskmaster did look good. I'll give you that. Visually, Taskmaster looked good. The action sequences were decent. But just narratively, what they did with that character was like a total waste, in my opinion. Unfortunately. Anyway, next up, Ismail Montoya writes, "Hey, John, can we assume that Natasha is dead, but there can be another Black Widow?" Yeah, there can be. I mean, listen, it's like Captain America. You can slap. I mean, there was one true Black Widow, and that's Natasha, right? She's the one true Black Widow. 10 years from now, when you ask, who's Black Widow? Natasha. But yeah, if you want to play pretend, you can take the name and slap it on another character if you want. Like, a lot of people are assuming Elaine is going to be the new Black Widow. They may never call her Black Widow, right? They just might be Elena. Just like until WandaVision, they never called Wanda Scarlet Witch, right? So, look, Captain America is Steve Rogers. That's Captain America. You can take the name and slap it on another character if you want and play pretend. But I don't care if you slap that tag on Bucky or Sam or John Walker. I don't care. None of them are actually the real Captain America. Steve Rogers is the real Captain America. And now somebody else is walking around with that tag to kind of carry on the legacy, and that's fine. Whatever. So they can call somebody else Black Widow, and they may or they may not, but there's only one Black Widow in the MCU, and that's Natasha. No matter who else picks up the name tag and puts the name tag on themselves. It doesn't change the thing to me. But anyway, that's just me. All right. Oh, I'm seeing a bunch of people in the live chat saying Italy won. Forza Italia, ladies and gentlemen. Forza Azzurri. So apparently Italy won. Man, that was not great because that was not good. I was watching the game before we started this thing and watching Italy go down 1-0 in the second minute of the game. I'm like, are you kidding me? Anyway. But apparently Italy won. Came back, scored in the second half, put it to penalties. I mean, penalties. Can I just, a side note, it's one of the things I hate about soccer. One of the things I hate about soccer. Winning in penalties should not be how a game is won. Like, these countries put teams together. They play, they build up to this huge thing. Then they play in this massive tournament. And it comes down to something that's not even the game. Just penalty kicks. That's not how, a championship should be determined. It should be like hockey. You keep playing until somebody scores. And I've seen hockey games that have literally gone into 4 periods of overtime. That's longer than, more overtime than a full regulation game. But you keep playing the game until somebody scores properly. And I think that's what they should do with soccer. Screw this penalty kicks. I've seen a World Cup that was decided on penalty kicks. To me, that's ridiculous. Really takes away from the game for me. But anyway, whatever. We're not here to talk about soccer, although Forza Italia. But let's get back to talking about Black Widow, shall we? All right, next up, Matthew Carter writes, sends in like a $20 super chat. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate that, man. Who writes, "Hey, John, I like the movie, but this movie had no stakes and is just 6 years overdue. The only time I really got excited was them setting up Ross and Red Hulk with the comment on how his health is starting to fail, not worth $30. I don't think they're setting up Red Hulk, but that is what it is. Was it over? First of all, I did feel like they made it had stakes. Obviously, there weren't stakes for Natasha herself because we knew exactly where she was going. But we didn't know what was going to happen with this organization. We didn't know what was going to happen to Red Guardian. We didn't really know. I mean, we knew Yelena was going to be in Hawkeye, but we had no idea in what capacity or in what way. So we really didn't know what was going to happen to Yelena. So I disagree that there were no stakes. Not great. Not great. But I disagree that there were no stakes. And also like the health failing thing. Remember back in Infinity War, Ross was talking about like he had already had heart attacks and stuff like that. So that's been around for a while already, but maybe they'll go Red Hulk. Maybe they won't. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, Matthew, thanks for sending that in. And thanks for supporting our channel on that level, man. That's really kind of you. Thanks, dude. I appreciate that. All right. Next up, let's see. 40 Licks writes, "Hey, John, how would you rank Black Widow in terms of a character's first movie, i.e. Iron Man, Ant-Man, Thor?" I don't do rankings. I thought the movie was solid. I thought the movie was solid. And it's not... See, here's the thing. When Thor, you can't really compare them because when Iron Man had his first movie, that was our introduction to Iron Man. When Thor had his first movie, that was the first time we saw Thor. When Ant-Man had his first movie, that was the first time we had seen Ant-Man. We've known Natasha for a decade. We've had tons of Black Widow in Iron Man 2, in Avengers, in Winter Soldier, in Civil War, in Infinity War, in Endgame. I mean, we've had 10 plus years of her before she finally had her first one. So it's really an apples to spaceships kind of comparison, because all those other ones you mentioned, this was our true introduction to these characters. Like even Black Panther wasn't really our true introduction to Black Panther because we had him in Civil War. Unlike Iron Man, Thor, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, these are all their first movies where it truly was our first introduction to them, the first time we're getting to see them, all that kind of stuff. So you can't really compare it in that way. But again, overall, I thought the movie was good. I enjoyed it. It was entertaining. But really, really, really bad villains kind of keeps it from being a great movie. That's my take on it at any rate. All right, Daniel S. Kendura sends in Super Chat badges to be supportive. Thank you, Daniel. Crashing Coyote writes, post-credit was stupid. I thought the post-credit was great, but whatever. Okay, it didn't work for you. That's all right. Post-credit was stupid based off the Far From Home opening. Is it Far From Home? Opening. The whole world knows Natasha sacrificed herself, and it can be resolved with one conversation with Clint. But you're making assumptions. Like, we don't know the totality of what information Valentina, or Elaine, is giving to Yelena. Like, you're making assumptions based on information we simply haven't been given yet. And that's why when a lot of people are asking, what's this happening with Valentina, blah, blah, I'm like, hey, listen, we don't have enough information yet. We have this briefest of brief little post-credit scenes that really didn't give us much information at all. But she handed Yelena like a full dossier. There's more information in there, information that we're not privy to yet. So I can't say that, the post-credit scene was the most important post-credit scene ever. It did get me more excited for Hawkeye. We also can't say, sorry, my wife is text messaging me. When the wife text messages, you read the messages. If it needed a reply, I would also pause and say, need to pause for a second, guys, because, happy wife, you get to continue to live. So anyway, where were we? Oh, yes. So don't base a whole theory off, the post-credit made no sense, when we don't have the most fraction bit of information to what was really going on, what in totality was being communicated to her. How are they phrasing that whole thing to her? We just got the slightest little glimpse of it yet. So let's see how he goes. All right. Next up. Next up. We've got Daniel again sends in a super chat badge to be supportive. Thank you, Daniel. 40 Links also writes, how are you feeling towards the post-credit scene? I thought it was meh. Like, why would Val place Nat's death on Clint? I didn't get it. Hawkeye. Again, you didn't get it because they didn't give us the information to get it yet. How is Valentina phrasing and setting up the information that she's giving? What all else was in that dossier? Why? We don't even know why Valentina wants to target Clint. Does it have something to do with all the killing he was doing between the events of Infinity War and Endgame? Maybe yes, maybe no. We don't even know that yet. So all I know is this. For me, it worked just on the basic level of it showed a direct connection to what is coming in Hawkeye. Narratively, it fits because of the close relationship between Nat and Hawkeye, now having Yelena come in there. And if they're phrasing the information to Yelena, that makes it look like Clint really is responsible. And by the way, saying he's responsible for her death, again, in an Obi-Wan Kenobi way, is true from a certain point of view. I mean, it all depends. And this is all information we don't have yet. So on its most basic level, the post-credit scene really did work for me. I especially like the little whistle part and all that kind of stuff. I thought that worked. and getting more of a narrative connection out of Hawkeye, that worked. But again, there's so much information we don't have. So I'm not going to formulate this super positive way of looking at it, nor any kind of negative way of looking at it, because we simply don't have enough information yet. That's my take on it at any rate. All right. Next up, Al Renshaw writes, "Hey, John, I am now more excited for Hawkeye. Feige has done it again. John, I am not excited for Hawkeye. Feige, you will." Yeah, look, it's just been forever, right? I have always loved the Black Widow and the Hawkeye characters in the MCU. I love them in the MCU, but I have never been interested in their own standalone projects. They are mere mortals amongst gods. And I love them as supporting characters. I've never been interested in their own lead things. That said, I did quite enjoy Black Widow. Not great, but I quite enjoyed it. And with that post-credit scene, yeah, I gotta admit, I'm now kind of not super excited, but kind of excited for Hawkeye. Now that they've drawn a little bit of a narrative connection, there's still a lot we don't know, but I'm on board. I'm on board. Okay, let's move on here. Next up, Daniel writes, "Fun fact: the big guy who has his first fist broken. I misread that. Sorry, you didn't write it wrong. I misread it. Sorry about that. The big guy who had his fist broken by Red Guardian is Ursa Major, a mutant who turns into a bear." I had no idea. Did they actually give him a name in the movie? I didn't even pay attention, but I did think that scene was funny when he's just like, come on. At that point in that prison, everybody has to know this is the Red Guardian. He's a super soldier. You're not going to beat him in an arm wrestling match, but that is a fun fact, Daniel. I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing, dude. All right, Crashing Coyote writes, "But I can't wait to see Yelena in season 9 of Arrow." In Arrow. Hi. I see what you did there. I'll give you a little, the drum shot there. Okay, next up, Tyler Piffer writes, "I actually thought Taskmaster was cool, just written and executed poorly. But I mean, that's all there is to the character. How are they written? How are they executed? I don't know how you consider him a cool character if you don't think it was written well and if you don't think it was executed well. If you're saying you actually think Taskmaster is cool in their origins out of the comic, but hey, listen, man, if you like Taskmaster, awesome. The fight scenes were good. I'll give it that. I hated this character. I hated the revelation. I thought it was a total waste of a villain, but I will say the action sequences involving Taskmaster were pretty good, so I will give it that. All right, next up, Ben Rayner writes, "Really enjoyed this movie. ScarJo owns the character by now completely. Florence sold me on her character. Can't wait for Hawkeye. Hated smelling blocking weapon. Made no sense. B+ for me. Same as Captain. Yeah. Ray Winstone's thing that he gives off that. Yeah, that was weird. Can I say that was weird? Look, I'm not going to say that it doesn't make sense because the science behind the theory, theoretically speaking, yeah. But you're also saying that the moment you stop inhaling it, it doesn't work anymore. They could have fleshed that out a little bit more. Plus, it was a thing that they just dropped in there at the last second. Like, all of a sudden, this thing that Ray Winstone characters has going for him is just suddenly introduced right there. Yet another thing that goes towards my overall disappointment. Of the villains in this character. So, yeah. I mean, again, and that could have been an interesting plot device. That could have been an interesting plot device if they had kind of set it up in some way, but just out of nowhere. Wait a minute, why can't I hit you? Because you smelled me. Ha ha ha. Like, it was just out of nowhere, dropped into our laps, and then, okay, if I just break my nose, I'm cool. I don't know. Here's an idea. Stop breathing through your nose, idiot. You cannot hurt me. Oh, yeah? Stabby, stabby. I'm plugging my nose now. Stabby, stabby. Like, what? I don't know. That made no sense to me. Whatever. Stabby, stabby. That should be the name of the next movie. Yelena's first movie. Black Widow Returns. Stabby, stabby. That's the name of it. I bookmarked it. I'm trademarking that. Kevin Feige, get a hold of me. You can pay me if you want the title rights. Stabby, stabby. All right. Next up. Nuno writes, I loved Harvey Weinstein as a villain. So creepy. I never even thought of that as a connection until somebody else wrote that in earlier, Nuno. But yeah, I totally see now. Totally Harvey Weinstein was the villain of the movie. Okay, next up. Donaldo Martinez sends in a super chat badge to be supportive. Thank you, Donaldo. Jamie writes in, Thanos took 10 years to build up. Killmonger was awesome. But other than that, the MCU doesn't do bad guys very well. Hope they figure that out. Well, I mean, traditionally they haven't, but they have done some very good bad guys before. Like, obviously, Killmonger was quite good. I like Killmonger a lot. Loki, obviously. I've loved Loki since the first Thor movie. I honestly, I've completely loved Loki since the very first Thor movie. If you go to Winter Soldier, Bucky was fantastic. Even before, they redeemed him, he was fantastic as a villain in that film, as the antagonist. Now, of course, there was a bigger bad guy behind the scenes in Robert Redford, yes, but the primary villain was Bucky, and that was done tremendously well. That was great. So, I mean, they have had successes. So it's not to say that Marvel hasn't had some great success with their villains, but it's also fair to say that that's not traditionally their strong point. It's not traditionally their strong point. By the way, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ronan the Accuser. I thought Ronan was a great villain. I really did like Ronan. Ego in Guardians 2, not so much. I'm not the biggest fan of Guardians 2, but I thought Ronan the Accuser was a terrific villain. So they've had successes. They have. But they've also dropped the ball a number of times. Not their biggest strength. Villains are not their biggest strength. All right. Next up, we go to Gabe Campbell, who writes, I like the Taskmaster fight scenes. Me too. But other than that, I was disappointed by her. But as a fan of Taskmaster, I was disappointed other than that. But as a fan of Taskmaster, I was disappointed other than that good movie. What? That post-credit scene, oh my God, great setup. I'm not understanding that last point. Then I was disappointed by her, but as a fan of Taskmaster, I was disappointed other than that, good movie. Okay, punctuation. Other than that, good movie. I agree. Post-credit scene, oh my God, great setup. Again, we're hearing from some people also that the post-credit scene didn't really work for them. Totally fair. If the post-credit scene didn't work for you, not a problem. Totally fair. But yeah, for me, it worked. And yeah, the setup to Hawkeye was great. But again, it's that moment that was brought up earlier in the movie, the whistle. The whistle was great. I just emotionally, it was a really good callback to something that happened earlier in the film. It had an emotional moment to me. And oh my God, I half expected that Natasha was going to step out from behind a tree and whistle back. I really was half expecting that. Didn't happen, but I thought it was quite good. All right, next up. Donaldo Martinez sends in a super chat badge. Thank you, Donaldo. 40 Licks writes, in terms of the podcast of the post-credit scene, maybe Val tried to recruit Clint in his Ronin days, and he declined, so now she feels he must be eliminated. I mean, that's possible, but let's call it what it is here. Now, we're just taking wild stabs in the dark. Stabby. We're just taking wild stabs in the dark. I mean, that is theoretically possible. It really does. She want him murdered because he wouldn't work with her? Okay, that's a bit of a stretch. But again, we just don't have enough information yet. But hey, listen, 40, it's as good of a theory as any one that I've got right now. It's as good of a theory as anyone that I have. All right, Daniel writes, Russian Old Spice prevents her from ever hurting you. That's what we do. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, right there, that is an Old Spice product that I think we could all get behind. And I think I speak for men everywhere when I say if I could have an Old Spice product that made it so, she never hurts me. I could do anything dumb. She'll never, that little 105 pounds of Filipina fury would never be unleashed down upon my head. That would probably be a good product to have. That would be a good product to have. I would buy that. I would invest. I would buy stocks in that thing. Yes. Stabby. All right. Next up, we got, where are we at? We're at Tyler Pfeiffer, who writes, had absolutely no idea that Olga Kurilenko was going to be in this. She's a kick-ass actress, and a shame Taskmaster was kind of wasted. Yeah. Again, I don't think Olga's the strongest actress in the world, but she can be passable. She can be passable. I honestly think the Hitman movie proved that. Her stint in Bond kind of proved that. Not exactly, super exciting like seeing a Hold a second. Jessica Chastain. You know, she's not exactly a Jessica Chastain. I was going to try to bring something up there. Not exactly a Jessica Chastain. Not exactly a Scarlett Johansson. You know, she's not a strong actress, but I mean, she can work, and she's sexy as hell. And let's face it, there are male and female performers that sometimes you put in there because they're great eye candy. So yeah, there's that too. But yeah, I gotta admit, it's cool to see her in there. It's cool to see her in there. All right, next up. Chris Elkins just sends in a super chat badge to be supportive. Thank you, Chris. Animated Effigy writes, I like that username. Writes, I think Val works for Ross. It's possible. I think Val works for Ross, and his medical issues in 2 movies screams Red Hulk. I know a lot of people are thinking that. It might be. I think the government Avengers will debut against the Skrulls in a reverse scenario of the first Avengers movie, Secret Invasion. Possible. Now we're looking way down the line here a little bit. I mean, that's a lot of ifs built upon other ifs, then built upon other ifs. But you never know. They might be going that way. Could be. All right, next up. Tyler also writes again. Also, I just love Rachel Weisz. Some gorgeous badass women in this film. Listen, that is, how many has she won? Let me just bring this up here for a second. Rachel Weisz has been nominated for several Academy Awards. But has she, I can't remember off the top of my head if she's actually won any. So yes, she has won. She was nominated in both The Favorite, which the performances around, I think that got several nominations in the performance, but she then did win for The Constant Gardener. She won an Academy Award. So she was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. She won an Academy Award for Constant Gardener. Rachel Weisz is amazing. I mean, she is world class. There's no way around it. I mean, I'm a little guilty of not mentioning her more in this review, but it's almost like if The Street Monster, like if Meryl Streep was in this, you don't really feel the need to point out she's one of the greats because everybody knows she's one of the greats. Like, we just expect Rachel Weisz is going to do something great. She was wonderful in it. She added that family dynamic. Absolutely. And yeah, some gorgeous, badass, super talented women in this movie. Totally dug it. All right. Next up, Scared Fish writes, was I the only one who got instantly giddy at those opening credits with the rendition of Smells Like Teen Spirit? I mean, there was just a lot about that opening that I loved. I thought it was very, very well executed. Like right to the point where he's like, my girls are the toughest girls, like that. And you could tell something weird was going on. Anyway, that whole opening Scarefish, I think, was great. And the music choices were great too. All right, Richard K. writes, loved this movie, but do you think we will see more of Red Guardian and Barajas' mom in the MCU? And when will next play and chat be? Well, I don't know what I'm going to do in my next play and chat. We've been kind of busy. I am going to continue my play and chats. I just got to figure out a good game to play other than just online poker. I usually play online poker. I got to find a game that is a good game to play during play and chats. Anyway, again, we talked about this earlier in the stream. I really hope we see more Red Guardian. And obviously Rachel Weisz, but I would love to see more of them. I think the 2 of them together are dynamite. Whether they're come back as supporting characters, whether they're given their own Disney Plus series, I don't care. I'll be on board and I'll watch the hell out of it. So I hope they come back. All right, next up. Richard K. Also writes, love this movie. We'll see more of Red Guardian and Rachel Weisz in the MCU going forward. Loved Red Guardian. Highlight of the movie for me. And when is your next plane chat? We already talked about the next plane chat. But yeah, I completely agree. I think they gave all the choice best moments of the movie to Red Guardian and David Harbour. I would watch the hell out of anything they did with these 2 moving forward. I completely agree, Richard. And by the way, I just noticed you tipped in like $20 submitting that. So thank you for that, man. I really appreciate that. And I am in 100% agreement with you. Absolutely in 100% agreement with you. All right. Rock Lobster writes, I agreed that Red Guardian stole the movie, but I actually enjoyed Yelena more. Hey, listen. And again, Florence Pugh was fantastic. She was, and listen, I know I've mentioned it, but it cannot be overstated. You can't forget what a daunting task that is. You've got one of the world's best actresses in a role that is beloved in the MCU, Scarlett Johansson, and you have to play opposite that. And you have to win the audience over. That is a daunting task for any actress. And I thought what Pugh was able to do was fantastic. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought Red Guardian stole it, but there, like you saw in today's live stream, a lot of people thought Yelena stole it. And I totally understand that and respect that too. All right. Next up, we've got, where are we? Rock Lobster also writes, do you think that Yelena should know Clint isn't really responsible for Natasha's death? The public seems to know a lot about what happened in Endgame. It all depends on how it's being fed to her. Like, yes, they can say the basic information of Clint and Natasha Romanoff were on this planet. One of them had to sacrifice themselves. Natasha volunteered to sacrifice herself for it. Okay. But maybe other information gets put to her. Again, who knows what's in that dossier? Who knows what's in that dossier? I'm sure Yelena knows the basics. They went there, Natasha sacrificed herself. But maybe she gets fed other information. But I mean, again, this is what it goes back to. You shouldn't be building any too big of a strong of a theory or be so against it or be so for it when the reality is we have so little information to build off of. I'm going to wait and withhold any judgment on that until we see what was it Yelena's been told. So let's see what that is. Then we can start forming some basis on that. All right. Thanks for that, Rock Lobster. All right. Next up, Richard K. writes, I also would love to see a Red Guardian Disney Plus show. Also, Conor McGregor's leg. Ouch. Yeah. And also over under 30%. We will see General Thunderbolt Ross as Hulk in She-Hulk under 30%. I go even 2%. 2%. As far as McGregor's look, I don't wish that sort of thing on anybody. Like that was horrific. What we saw, I don't wish that on anybody. Okay. So let me just say that I wouldn't even wish that on Conor McGregor. That being said, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. And super, super on board for a Disney Plus Red Guardian movie. That I'm all for. All right. 40 Licks writes, first Clint loses family, then loses Nat, now gets blamed for her death. No wonder he is handing the bow over to Kate Bishop. Again, let's not assume too much. Let's see what goes on here. I mean, everybody's assuming she's the next Hawkeye. Yelena's the next Black Widow. It's like, why don't just characters take on their own freaking names? Like, Clint is Hawkeye. Natasha is Black Widow. But John, in the comic, I don't give a shit what they do in the comics. Don't give a shit. But I don't know. Who knows? We'll see. But yeah, poor Hawkeye. He's like, loses his family, loses his daughter. He's got to run around with the Avengers, and he's like him and Natasha, like he's the most vulnerable one. They go into battle at the beginning of Age of Ultron. He's the guy that gets almost mortally wounded. All the crap he goes through. He's going around the world just trying to get his anger out, killing a whole bunch of criminal stuff like that. Loses Natasha, now getting blamed for her death. I mean, it is one crappy day after another for poor Clint, man. One crappy day after another. All right, next up. Rich K writes, John, Italy are playing England in your Euro football soccer file. Surprised you're not watching. Hey, listen, no, I was watching it when it started, but work comes first. Work comes first. We said we were going to be doing our spoiler discussion day. This was the best time for it. So if it meant that I had to skip watching the game, I mean, look, I'm not the world's biggest soccer fan anyway, right? But I do get totally involved when it's Italy. Yes, I do. But this comes first. You guys come first. Our community comes first, even when Italy ends up winning in penalties. But you guys come first. All right, next up. Let's see. The 8th writes, I really enjoyed Black Widow. I thought it would be just mediocre. I love the family stuff, and Yelena's a fantastic addition. 4DX was actually quite thrilling as well. I was giggling the entire time. Yeah, listen, again, this is why I always say you got to check your expectations at the door. My expectations were not great. I didn't think I'd like the family dynamics. I wasn't sure I was going to like David Harbour. I'm not all that interested in, Black Widow having her own standalone story. And I really didn't know. Like, look, it's the MCU, so I expected it was going to be at least quality. But this is why you leave your expectations at the door. The humor was great. The family dynamic was fantastic. David Harbour killed it. Yelena was really good, a big success. ScarJo is ScarJo. She totally delivered, obviously. The funny thing is, the part that I really thought would work in the movie was Taskmaster. That's the one thing I really thought this is probably going to be the strength of the movie. Taskmaster will probably be the strength of the movie. And it turns out that was the worst part of the movie. So this is why, guys, I always tell you, Have your expectations. That's totally fine. But you got to take those expectations, put them in a backpack, and leave them at the door when you go in to watch a movie. And just judge the movie in its own merits, because, you know, it will constantly surprise you. And by the way, our friend Suthia sends in a super chat badge to be supportive. Thank you, Suthia. Appreciate that, man. All right, next up. Hani Ahmed writes, did you notice that Natasha was wearing Yelena's vest in Infinity Wars? Oh, you know what? I didn't. Do you guys in the live chat, do you know if that's true? Was that Yelena's vest? Did she then go on and wear that in Infinity War? I totally didn't notice it. I totally did not know. So Cam, Mighty Tank, Marvel, DC, Star Wars fan said, you're all saying, yeah. Again, a really nice connection. Like, I totally missed Loki bringing up Dreykov's daughter. That thing about the vest being carryover, I totally missed that. I totally did. See, this is one of the reasons why I love doing these spoiler discussions. I learn so much from you guys doing this as well, you guys in the live chat. So thank you guys, and everybody who's confirming it in the live chat there as well. Cole, Raymond, Buggins, Kevin, Jeremy, GA, Ragard, Bucky, thank you guys. Appreciate that. That's another cool little thing to know. All right, next up, we go to Casinema Reviews, who writes, personally, I liked what they did with Taskmaster. I thought the question why they got Olga Kurilenko for that minimal role, I doubt that was her in suit. Well, I mean, look, let's call it what it is. Olga Kurilenko is not a big name in Hollywood. she's not an A-list actress. I mean, if you're Olga Kurilenko and you get offered a small little bit part in a Marvel MCU film, you take it. It's not like she's, you know, blowing up or anything right now. And by the way, I feel bad. I feel like all I've been doing is crapping on Olga Kurilenko. I like Olga Kurilenko, okay? I like her. Let's not pretend that it was like, oh my gosh, they had Anne Hathaway and only appeared. It's Olga Kurilenko. I mean, I like Olga, but let's not blow it out of proportion a little bit. Anyway. All right, next up. Where are we at? GC Nightwalker writes, I don't care about any change to Taskmaster, but that she isn't a self-serving mercenary with photographic reflexes is the core. All else is fine. It's the core of who it is in the comic books. For a minor character that nobody who isn't a comic book reader has never heard of. Now look, normally I'm with you. Like, normally to me, you at least have to capture the core essential elements of who that character is. You can make all the changes in the world to characters from the comics to the screen, as long as you capture those core essential things about them, right? Oh, this character had brown eyes, not blue eyes. Not important. This character was 6'8", not 6'10". Not important. This character wore blue pants, not green pants. Not important. This person worked as an engineer, not as an astrophysicist. Not important. This person dated somebody named Susie, not somebody named Tracy. Not important. This person's big weakness is something called kryptonite. That's important. You know, it's about finding those 2 or 3 key essential elements, like Wolverine in the movies. Wolverine is not 6 feet tall. He's not 6'1", 6'2", like Hugh Jackman. That's not how tall Wolverine is. Not important. The feral nature, the vicious, the animalistic rage, and the animated. These are the things that make Wolverine who Wolverine is. So normally I'm all on board for that. But the reality is, Taskmaster, everybody who's never read a comic book has heard of Wolverine. Everybody who's never read a comic book has heard of Superman. Nobody who went to go see Black Widow that doesn't know the comic lore, and let's face it, that's 95% of the audience, has never even heard of Taskmaster, who is going to be used as a throwaway villain in a movie. So ultimately, it's not really important. And again, even if they did those things, it still wouldn't have been good because they didn't write the character well. They didn't do a proper setup. They didn't get us emotionally invested in it. They didn't set up anything where the connection became vital to the audience's reaction to the movie. So whether the Taskmaster had this background or this background, it wouldn't have made any difference. You got to execute. And if they execute, listen, winning cures everything. So if they had done everything plot-wise exactly the same, but they fleshed it out, they executed well, they gave us a reason to get invested in who and what this Taskmaster is and all that kind of stuff, then we wouldn't have cared. But the fact is they dropped the ball, and it's hard to overcome, man. It's hard to overcome. All right, let's see. Next up, we got BW Rosa writes, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine showing up in post. Yeah, it was good to see. But again, remember, that was supposed to happen before Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but because of COVID, everything got mixed up. All right, Dave Wilson writes, everybody's saying the villains were bad. What exactly would have made them good? Same thing that would have made any characters good. Flesh them out. Make them more integral to the narrative floor of the story. Give them good dialogue. Give us some reason to care about what they're doing and how they're connected to our protagonists. These are all things that just don't make good villains, that make good characters. They were just badly done and badly executed characters. It's not about have him wear a red shirt instead of a blue shirt. That wouldn't have made it any better. Have Taskmaster be a guy. That wouldn't have made it any better. It's the same basic principle. Let's go back again to Hans Gruber. From the moment Hans Gruber came on screen in Die Hard, he was fascinating. He was slick. He was cool. He had incredible dialogue. Then the chemistry and the banter between him and John McClane, yippee-ki-yay. I mean, all that, it's just the basic foundational work of first, to make a great villain, make a good character. Make a good character. Then you start forming and developing the way they tie into the overall narrative, how the dynamics work between them and the other. It's just all basic stuff, and they drop the ball on all of it. So anyway, but that's just my character. Listen, Dave, if you liked the Ray Winstone character and the Taskmaster character, awesome. That's great. I'm not trying to take away from your experience at all. If you liked it, awesome. That's great. It's just that it didn't work for me, and that's why it didn't work for me. I wish it did, though. All right, next up. Jerome writes, do you think it would have been better if there was no brainwashing like Yelena chooses, like Natasha did, to stop, or Taskmaster is legitimately loyal? No. Again, that's a detail. That's not narrative flow. Because if the movie was exactly the same, but just Yelena decided to leave. Okay, but it doesn't really fundamentally change anything about the movie, really. The mind control thing is important because it also gives Natasha and Yelena a sense of responsibility for the other girls in the program. That's necessary. The whole mind control aspect of it becomes a necessary element of that. So no, I don't think, listen, I don't think taking it away would have necessarily made the movie any worse, but I don't know that taking away also would have made it necessarily any way better. I didn't, like, of the weaknesses of the film, I don't think that was one of the weaknesses, but that's just kind of my take on it. All right, next up. Thanks for sharing your thoughts there, Jerome. Next up, Mighty Tank 1 writes, kind of lame they didn't give us a proper flashback to what happened in Budapest with Clint. 7 out of 10. Thanks for doing this discussion on short notice. Yeah. But how is that? Let me push back on that a little bit, Mighty Tank brother. How would that have been relevant to the story? How would it have been relevant to the story? It wouldn't have been relevant. The story they were telling of this was completely disconnected from whatever happened in Budapest. That was a separate thing, whatever that was. So to throw it in there would have been just putting it in there to put it in there. If it doesn't serve the story, don't have it in there. I mean, that's usually the first rule of thumb. Like, if it does not serve the story, don't put it in. Now, would I have been against it if, like, the opening of the film, instead of the opening that they had was like Budapest 10 years ago, and they showed a quick 5-minute scene of what it was that happened in Budapest, just to give us a little bit more background and understanding of Natasha? I would have been fine with that. But considering whatever happened in Budapest was completely, or how did she pronounce Budapest or whatever, was apparently completely unconnected to the events and the story that was being told in this movie, I have no problem that they left it out. But that's just my take on it, brother. That's all. That's just my take on it. Okay. Next up. Let's see. That was Mighty Tank. Next, we've got Patrick Conway, who writes, I'm curious, what do the public in the MCU know about Black Widow's death? Do they just think she died in battling Thanos at the compound? My guess is they probably said part of the thing that brought back everybody was two of the Avengers, Hawkeye, Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff. They had to travel to a different world. And in order to get an aspect of our solution, one of them had to sacrifice themselves, and Natasha sacrificed herself. I'm guessing, although they haven't explicitly given us an answer to this, but my guess is that the public knows that. Again, I don't know that for sure, but that is my guess. All right, thanks for writing that in, Patrick. Next up, we got Chris Elkins writes, "Hey, John, I thought Black Widow was great." Well, awesome. I mean, I didn't think it was great. I thought it was good, but you enjoyed it even more than I did. And that's awesome. I'm just left to feel jealous. I wish I could have enjoyed as much as you did, but I'm glad you thought it was great, man. All right, thanks for sharing your thoughts. Jetfire97 writes, "Hey, John, I love your reaction to bad puns. So when it comes to compelling MCU villains, when it came to Black Widow, they had one task to master. I'll leave. All right, you don't deserve it, but I will give you the coveted John Campea drum shot." Well done. Well done. All right, next up, Anthony C. writes, "My few complaints were the weak villains, definitely. And in my opinion, I thought the editing wasn't best at times. That was mentioned by other people earlier as well, Anthony C. And I agree. There were some really weird again, and it seems like the easiest to edit during dialogue, but it was the dialogue times that I thought the editing choices were really kind of weird, but whatever. Florence Pugh was my favorite part of the film. She was great. She was definitely a big plus for me. Again, for me, it's Red Guardian. Red Guardian to me was my biggest surprise. I thought they gave him all the choice moments. I thought they gave him all the best lines. I thought he was a real scene stealer. I really do. I loved him in this movie. And, but yeah, Florence Pugh playing Yelena was absolutely fantastic. Very pleasant surprise as well. Really, really pleasant surprise as well. All right, next up, Anthony C. also writes, "Do you think it was Scarlett's farewell, or will she return in the MCU again in some capacity? Over, under 25%? Dude, I'll take over 75%. Hell, I'll say 80%. She'll be back. Again, I'm not saying it'll be this year. I'm not saying it'll be next year. I'm not saying it'll be in 3 years, but she'll be back. Same as Chris Evans, same as Robert Downey Jr. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, hell, maybe not in 3 years, maybe not even in 4, but they will all be back. I guarantee it, one way, shape, or form, they will all be back. All right, let's see here. Next up, Christopher Hansen writes, "Great fight scenes. I thought the action was a strong part of the movie. I felt every kick and punch much more than any other MCU film." I mean, maybe part of it was because it was more, as Robert Meyer Burnett would put it, more verisimilitude. Like for instance, for me, when you talk about, let's go talk about for a second A Quiet Place. Not A Quiet Place 2, but the first one, A Quiet Place. You've got these awesome alien monsters ripping people apart. And yeah, that's horrifying. But to me, the most gut-wrenching, screaming, terrifying moment in that movie was when Emily Blunt was just walking down her basement stairs, and we, the audience, knew there was that one rusty nail sticking up. And her stepping on that nail was one of the most gut-ripping, horrific, pain-inducing, butt cheeks clenching moments in any movie I've ever seen. In a movie with alien monsters ripping people apart, because I know that could totally happen to me. Walking down the stairs or walking down the sidewalk and you step on a piece of glass or a nail going up through your shoe and you're... So when you get action in like a TV show like Warrior, which I'm loving on HBO, or in a Black Widow where it's more realistic kind of fighting, where it's actually human beings punching each other in the face, we tend to feel it a little bit more. Even more than Thor throwing Stormbreaker into Thanos' chest. Emily Blunt stepping on a nail on a stair is far more. And that's why when the action feels a little bit more relatable, it becomes a little more tense for us, I think. I don't know. Maybe I need to put it another way, but that's how it kind of feels to me. All right. Tracy Dale writes, just thanks for all you do. Oh, thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that very much. It's very kind of you to say. Appreciate that. All right. And the last question today, and then we are all wrapped up here, guys, comes us from Patrick Conway, who writes, love Nat fighting all the widows because it clearly showed that Nat is the Black Widow and was the best fighter out of the Red Room. Oh, I agree. This is one of the reasons why I felt like, some people mentioned today, and I respect the opinion, some people mentioned today that they felt like it was really Yelena's movie and Black Widow was really just a side character. I disagree with that. I felt like in every step of the way, they made sure Natasha was the central part of that movie and the central character. And I think that whole ending part, the fact that it was her that went into Ray Winstone's office, not Yelena, and the fact that it was her who ultimately had to combat all the other girls from the room, I think that was important, and showing her ultimate supremacy. Like, she couldn't beat all of them, but she alone could be the one that could stand against all of them. And eventually had to get out of it for sure. But I think all that is just more things that really point towards that she is the central figure. And I really, really like that. All right, guys, we've been going for 2.5 hours on this, and that'll do it for our Black Widow open spoiler discussions. Guys, thank you so much for being here and participating in this. Special thank you to all you guys who sent in your comments, thoughts, observations, reviews, and questions regarding the movie, because number one, you gave us great fun things to talk about, and you taught me some things I didn't know, like the vest and Dreykov's daughter. I love when I learn stuff from you guys. Now, but also you supported this channel as you did it, and all of us involved with the John Campea YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for your support. Okay, guys, that will do it for us for now. Don't forget the John Campea Show returns tomorrow. That is on Monday. Me and Robert Meyer Burnett will be here on Monday. So hopefully you guys will come back and join us for then. And then, of course, Tuesday we got the John Campea Show, plus the Loki series finale pre-game show is on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we got our Loki series finale post-game spoiler discussion on Wednesday. Big busy week coming up in front of us. Hope that you guys will join us for that. All right, guys, that will do it for me. Thanks a lot for being here. My name's John Campea, and until next time, my friends, bye-bye.